Chapter 357. Has the Holy Church been forced to such a state? When I learned of a certain person's shameless actions, I wasn't angry at all. In fact, I was quite happy. Sometimes being in the lead was equivalent to being the victor. For example, a leader who had more than 80% of the market share would have a hard time catching up as long as they didn't take too big of a risk or make a major mistake. For a behemoth like the Holy Church, there was a limit to how much external pressure it could receive. As long as there weren't any internal conflicts, the Holy Church would probably be able to survive for several hundred years. This time, the Holy Church finally made a mistake, and a major one at that. I could understand that the Holy Church's decision wasn't necessarily the wrong one given the current situation. In fact, since the Holy Church had such a solid foundation, it was actually an excellent decision. The Holy Church had the advantage of public opinion, so of course they could do whatever they wanted. From this, it could be seen that things had been going smoothly for them for far too long, and they felt that their position wouldn't be challenged at all. In fact, they were even looking down on the Ale faction. The Holy Church's higher-ups probably only wanted to use this battle report to stabilize the situation for now. After this period of time, when the Holy War entered a stalemate, not only would the other countries still remember this, they might even request help from the Holy Church due to the war's unfavorable situation. And even if this incident was brought up in the future, the battle achievement announcement was written ambiguously to begin with. The main point of the announcement was that it was a victory under the guidance of the Holy Light. Since most people in this world believed in the Holy Light, this statement couldn't be said to be wrong. It was entirely possible to use a typo to deny it. And if the Holy Church was forced into a disadvantageous position, people would use this as a weakness against them. At that time, they could simply say that Cardinal Stephen was worried that the war's unfavorable situation would affect his future, so he lied to the Holy Church and deceived the higher-ups. He was stripped of his position and committed suicide on XX Mountain. Such an explanation would suffice. Cardinal Stephen was already dead, and the Holy Church had taken the blame. Actually, such things had happened many times already. As long as someone took the blame and the tree didn't fall, the Holy Church could only leave the matter unsettled. What the Holy Church needed right now was to do their best to reduce the negative effects of the first battle and increase the Holy Light faction's morale. Of course, it would be even better if they could eliminate the Ale faction's existence. However, there was one thing that even the Pope himself did not see, and this was the biggest mistake. He had underestimated the contract heroes and even completely ignored their existence. In this incident, the greatest victims weren't me, Oaktowns with spirits, or even ALS faction. We didn't need to prove our own abilities to the world, and there would be plenty of opportunities to prove ourselves. We didn't need to care about the glory of this battle. However, for the contract heroes who had risked their lives to make a name for themselves and gain glory, this epic battle had already changed their lives. Their shining military medals were still pinned to their chests, but the trophy that was already in their hands had been snatched away. If they bragged about it to others in the future, they might even be treated as scammers. This was a fatal pain for those youths who believed that honor was more important than their lives. Perhaps they would remember these hypocritical villains for the rest of their lives. At the very least, the clergy had been treated with enmity by other adventurers in the past few days. There were even a few young clergy who had chosen to serve the gods they were supposed to serve. The Pope and the cardinals had gotten used to being high above everyone else, but they had forgotten that the scariest part about humans was their ability to grow. Perhaps they were only noobs who had a low social status. But once the justice points helped them grow, when the first batch of newcomers became veterans of this profession, and when they used the power they obtained from the Holy Light's military achievement system to stand out in various places, these hidden bombs and unshakable hatred would truly take effect. Actually, in the near future, the third rule that the veterans of the Holy Light would give to the young noobs was, perhaps you could trust the clergy who truly believe in the Holy Light, but the Holy Church is a bunch of old bastards. Never leave your back to them. Otherwise, they'll steal the glory that should belong to you and burn you alive as a heretic. You don't believe me? Think about Oaktown. And once hatred was established at the very beginning, it would be difficult to reverse it no matter how much one did. Of course, the Holy Church's own Holy Knight system would be more than enough. How could they possibly think about the effect this competing contract hero system would have on the world, and whether or not the young noobs would become true heroes? Of course, even though we all knew what was going on and were quite satisfied with such an ending, it would be impossible for us to do nothing. Even though our Ale faction was indeed weaker than the Holy Light faction, we had already been attacked. If we didn't take revenge, wouldn't that make us seem too weak? And in this world, weakness was a sin in and of itself. Weakness would cause the wolves around us to lower their guard and truly begin their ambush. What does Ale intend to do? Or has he already done something? At such a time, it was naturally time for our boss to make a decision. In my mind, Ale wasn't someone who was used to swallowing insults and insults. 2 meteors have fallen from the sky over the past few days. Although the Holy Church hasn't made any public announcements, the small churches of the God of Discipline and the God of Punishment haven't received any response from their true gods. Their priests have also lost their divine power. Although these two gods don't have much of a presence, and are only mortals who ascended to become quasi-gods, they were both follower gods of the god of asceticism, Tiamat. You should understand why they silently perished. In ancient myths, meteors were also a sign that a god had fallen. But actually, a meteor might not necessarily be a god's death, but a god's death would definitely result in a meteor. Yep, it was actually a scene where a god's divine kingdom and divine throne were ablaze as they fell from the sky. Anyone who witnessed such a scene would instinctively know that a god had died. It was just like how the entire world would know if someone ascended to godhood. I had never even heard of these two gods before. I only learned that they were semi-gods who successfully became god envoys of the Holy Church in the past. They then swore loyalty to the true gods and became follower gods who shared their divine concepts and divine power. Their churches were all located within the Holy Church. The God of Discipline would provide heretical judges with divine arts to track down heretics, while the God of Punishment was a master of torture and interrogation. Both of these gods were incredibly weak gods, and they were completely Tiamat's lackeys, while Tiamat was the God of Holy Light's lackey. I heard that, fine, at least on the surface, this incident was caused by the powerful God of asceticism. His teachings advocate a masochistic lifestyle. He believes that if everyone is thrifty and poor, there won't be any conflicts in the world. He believes that he should wear simple clothing in winter to strengthen his body, and he should eat rice and drink cold water in summer to improve himself through asceticism. Although Tiamat is quite famous among the warrior monks, his teachings are naturally the mortal enemy of Baena, who seeks wealth to improve her lifestyle. Of course, the Holy Light bastard are the ones who spread the rumor that this incident was caused by Tiamat himself. I feel like the other bastards are also responsible for this incident. They're probably trying to push the blame onto another unlucky bastard who's the perfect scapegoat. Solo, the god of music and dance, was quite open-minded about this matter. He chatted with me through the bar that he was talking to. Ever since that incident, Solo had kept in contact with me. Of course, I didn't want to have anything to do with a gay god, but it was indeed necessary for me to obtain information from the higher realms. Not only that, I couldn't directly contact Ale for everything. The other god candidates were even more unreliable. I didn't know many gods at the moment. Mary was a dwarf goddess, after all, and she spent most of her time in a drunken state. As for Baena, I wasn't so foolish as to send myself to her doorstep. It seemed that she would automatically enter a berserk state whenever she heard my name. El killed him. He directly broke into Tiamat's divine kingdom and seriously injured him. He killed off 2 of the follower gods who tried to stop him, and even stole his divine soul and divine concept. The other main gods didn't react. The source of order didn't react either. The holy war has just begun, and they're already having a civil war. El must have crossed the line this time. Not at all. The Holy Light faction crossed the line first. The other main gods were quite displeased with AL's actions. But since Ale lost a god and Tiamat was seriously injured, this matter will end here. Neither side will continue spreading the news. From a certain standpoint, this was a type of compromise. It was a compromise made with the attention of the other main gods and the source of order. On the surface, it would seem that the Ale faction was at a disadvantage. After all, the Ale faction had lost a rare opportunity and reputation. Although the Holy Light faction had lost 2 gods, they were 2 follower gods who were so weak that not many people knew about them. They were completely negligible in the eyes of the main gods. But only I knew that we had actually made a huge profit this time. Punishment and discipline. Ale really went all out this time. These 2 divine concepts weren't much at all. In the current world, discipline was something that only a few ascetics and devout believers pursued. Punishment was a low-level concept that couldn't even be mentioned. These 2 divine concepts didn't seem to have much potential. While these 2 divine concepts weren't valued, the divine concept of using ascetic practices to atone for one's sins so that a pure soul could be brought into the divine kingdom was recognized by all the god churches. The divine concept of ascetic practices was quite impressive in this world where divine authority was so powerful. In fact, the god of ascetic practices was even more powerful than the goddess of wealth. Since ascetics and warrior monks were able to obtain powerful combat strength through ascetic practices, the Church of Ascetic Practices was formed by powerful elites who were skilled in combat. This made the god of masochism the incarnation of a powerful god. The end result was that the divine concepts of punishment and discipline became extensions of the concept of ascetic practices, which made them even less popular. It was precisely because Traymat felt that there was no more potential to be discovered that he gave these 2 divine concepts to his own follower gods. Did Ale directly steal their divine concepts? However, only I, Ale, and a few others knew that punishment and discipline were divine concepts that couldn't be obtained in our remaking the Hades plan. In that thick document, there's a list of gods that needed to be killed as soon as possible, and these 2 follower gods were among them. If punishment and discipline were concepts derived from religious practices, they would only be second-rate concepts among second-rate concepts. However, if they were concepts derived from law, for example, punishment would be the punishment for breaking the law, while discipline would be a lower-level concept than law itself. And discipline could even be derived from the concepts of judicial discipline and moral discipline. These 2 follower gods were necessary nourishment for the throne of law, as well as the necessary follower gods to create the hell of Hades. Of course, the after effects of this incident hadn't ended yet, or perhaps the higher-level gods had already come to an agreement. However, as mortals, we would still need to take revenge on the Holy Church, which was also immortal. As for those 2 divine concepts that were destined to suddenly disappear, even though there were likely many who knew about them, I merely nodded and didn't say anything in response to Solo's doubts. Some things were far too important. Even though Solo was a god on our side, I didn't want another person to know about them. It would seem that I'll need to hurry up as well. Of course, let's first deal with the important matter at hand. Great stone sculptor Ainslow, what else do you have to say? Wasn't the incredibly ugly mother of 10,000 stones who was currently feeling rather uneasy? When the battle reached a stalemate, I unhesitatingly summoned an ambush. Since great stone sculptor Ainslow had already entered the Forest of Dreams, in a way, she had also joined my side. Of course, I wouldn't forget to bring her a top-level combat strength onto the battlefield. However, the result was that out of the 7 Earth Elemental Plane's 7 saints, which were all saint-ranked and above in combat strength, only the youngest, Beifeng Herald, came. However, the result was miraculous. Could it be that the youngest of the 7 saints was also the most difficult to deal with? Getting back to the main topic, if we had lost, there would naturally be nothing to say. But now that we had won, we naturally had to take revenge for not listening to orders and running away. Otherwise, if everyone was like this, the morale of the Earth Elemental Planes would collapse, and it would be difficult to lead our troops. My lord, I'm truly innocent. You know that we're all Earth Elemental Lords, but the Titan Giants are the children of the Earth. We're completely unable to move in front of them. 2 streams of tears flowed down her cheeks and transformed into diamonds. It would seem that she had quite a bit of carbon in her body. I suddenly recalled the fairy tale about how mermaids' tears turned into pearls. Pearls were mainly composed of calcium carbonate. Mermaids were able to turn their tears into pearls because they had too much gypsum in their tear ducts, or were they mystical creatures that ate rocks as food? It seemed that only crocodiles ate rocks in the natural world. Although they ate rocks to help with digestion, crocodiles were also amphibious. Could it be that mermaids' true identity was actually a crocodile that had become sentient? Cough, cough. It seemed that I had accidentally ruined my childhood again. Getting back to the main topic about the old fossil mermaid, the stone mother, I'll talk about it some other time. I've accepted all the diamonds that she dripped. I'll see if I can sell them for some money later. It's not that I'm being stingy. It's that I've been robbed far too cleanly recently. When I find a bastard that stole my money, I'll definitely... What? I've gone off topic again? All right then, I'll talk about how to make a living next time. Let's get back to the main topic. Ainslow's tears kept flowing, but I directly treated them as crocodile tears. I wasn't an idiot. Although the Titan giants were known as the children of the earth, the winged tribe was also known as the children of the sky, and the elves were known as the children of nature and the children of the forest. Actually, they were all just trying to make themselves look good. What did it matter? The Titan giants weren't elemental creatures. They only acknowledged that the earth gave birth to them and that they were natural creations, not that some god had created them. If the Titan giants really had anything to do with the earth element, Omdaroken wouldn't have been the earth elemental god to begin with. Unable to move in front of the Titan giants? I think that you all know that the Titan giants are your opponents, so you don't dare to fight at all. Ainslow didn't reply. She also stopped crying. It would seem that even she felt that this act was rather boring. This ugly earth elemental lord that seemed short and short was actually a peer of Omdaroken's generation. She was much older than most true gods. Perhaps she had even seen the complete form of the Titan giants before. In that case, it was completely understandable that she was so scared of fighting. Even if she was capable of fighting against the Titan giants' incarnations, she would still be worried that the complete form of the Titan giants would come looking for her. And with her blocking the Titan giants, how could the other great saints possibly dare to fight? Thinking up to this point, I playfully sized up this short and fat ancient stone mother. Perhaps her power level wasn't much compared to the top-level combat strength, but her information about the immemorial era and the immemorial era was perhaps even more important than herself. Of course, it would be quite difficult to directly ask her about these things. But from a certain standpoint, the stone mother that had lost my trust was also losing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Before I figure out certain things, I still can't talk to her about that matter. Originally, I had intended to talk to her about repairing the Earth Elemental Throne and making a new Earth Elemental Lord the Earth Elemental God. However, such a sly and self-centered Earth Elemental Lord becoming the Earth Elemental God wouldn't be a good thing for us. As long as a new Earth Elemental God was created, it would naturally greatly slow down the Titan Giants' revival. The Earth Elemental God's creation required two conditions: a sufficiently powerful Earth Elemental Lord and the Earth Elemental Throne. According to what I knew, the great stone sculptor Ainslow before me was the Earth Elemental Lord closest to becoming the Earth Elemental God. However, the Earth Elemental Throne's shard had been stolen by two people. One was me, and the other was Bayphone. What do you say? Your brothers and sisters are all so unkind. I didn't mistreat them at all. Don't you think it's a bit too much for them to run away when they're needed? Back then, the Sandworm King that Bayphone had tamed had destroyed the Earth Elemental Throne. A portion of the Earth Elemental Throne's shard had definitely fallen into Bayfeng's hands. Those shards were supposed to be his spoils of war, but it was likely that Bayfeng would need to exchange them with Bayfeng in the future. This question wouldn't be easy to answer. It was quite obvious that the Forest of Dreams was beneficial to the Earth Elemental Lords. I wasn't making things up. While I was asking Bayfeng, I was staring at Ainslow, forcing her to give me an answer. Bayfeng also knew what was going on. He simply continued to tease the White Lion and didn't reply. Meanwhile, Ainslow herself remained silent. However, she also knew that she wouldn't be able to fool Beifeng like this. In the end, she would have to make a decision. Chapter 358. I can serve you, but you must pay me a price equal to my loyalty. If you can agree to one of my requests, perhaps it'll be easier for us to reach an agreement. Mother Stone's ambiguous words didn't give me an answer. However, judging from her expression as she secretly glanced at Beifeng, she actually had the shy expression of a young girl in love on her face, which was covered in lumps of stone. Everything was said without words. From a certain standpoint, Beifeng's abilities had indeed surpassed the legend of turning stone into gold. He was truly capable of moving a stone statue's heart. When I returned from the battlefield and learned of Beifeng's battle accomplishments, even I was confused. Impossible. Just by talking, he managed to tame a gigantic war beast that received the Titan Giant's divine power? Are you kidding me? That thing has at least semi-god combat strength, and it's also being restricted by the Titan Giants. How could it possibly betray me just like that? But sometimes certain people and certain things were just that unreasonable. Facts spoke louder than words, and reality spoke louder than theory. If you felt that something was inconceivable, it could only mean that you didn't understand the situation. Fine then, to be more direct, nobody knew what Beifeng had done, nor did they want to know. But when I saw this miraculous man who was able to move even the earth elemental stone goddess, having fun with that beautiful divine beast lion, even I felt that something was off. If you look at it from a different perspective, isn't he taming some ancient princess in another dimension, obtaining her dowry and a large number of subordinates? Not only that, his personal power level has increased exponentially through battle. Not only that, on the battlefield, he managed to use his mouth to tame a beautiful individual who could easily crush him. Everything has been so smooth. Yet, he's such a playboy all the way, and there won't be any bloodshed in his harem. Isn't this just like a YY novel's main character? Beifeng, if you changed your style, you could totally become a night novel's main character. In fact, his novels about his own love history and biography are selling like hotcakes. The descriptions of the details are complete. The main buyers are not only men, but even many married women love it. I read it before. It's truly amazing. Harlowe's words made me feel uncomfortable. How could this be possible? How could anyone buy such a thing that offended public morals? Not only that, Beifeng actually knew how to read. He even knew how to write. Drakens are intelligent creatures as well. Be careful not to get sued for racial discrimination. That's impossible. Just Beifeng's existence is enough to make it impossible for the book to pass the censorship. It's impossible for such a thing to be printed and published. No Chamber of Commerce would dare to accept such an order. To be honest, his writing is not bad, and his writing is also good. After reading it and comparing it, I realized that there was such a story in the world of beasts. Heloise, don't go the wrong way. Being interested and curious about certain forbidden areas was usually the beginning of walking down the wrong path. If changing a normal person's sexual orientation was called turning gay, then what exactly should it be called turning a normal person into a beast? Could it be that a new term was about to be born because of Beifeng? Beifeng, could you please stop? Hell, what are you thinking? Don't worry, I'm normal. Weren't the recent night novels popular to add some animal characteristics to the female characters? Since humans could imitate beasts, naturally, beasts could also imitate humans. The relationships between men and women in Beifeng's Chronicles of the Hunter were basically normal. If we were to compare it to real life, it would probably be beasts transforming into humans, males transforming into females, males transforming into females, and so on. The seventh female lead, Little Mia, is so cute, but I can't take it anymore when I think about how her original form was a big yellow dog, and a male one at that. As expected, it's enough to just look at the novel itself. Knowing about the author will only ruin your worldview. All right then, I felt slightly more at ease after hearing this explanation, but it seemed that there were still many flaws in Heloise's words. Forget about the explanation of male transforming into female. We all know what kind of person this guy is. The seventh female lead? With such a mess, how can the plot still be read? I asked that as well. I remember that Beifeng said this. Every single one of my relationships is serious, super serious, and I'm in love with my life on the line. I'm willing to give up everything, including my life, for my lover. This is the reason why I was able to obtain the heart of protection of universal love. I'm a playboy, but I'm even more single-minded. Every time I fall in love, I'm completely devoted. I enjoy the joy of being in love, and I long for the next relationship that comes along with fate. If you think that I'm only pursuing carnal desires, then you're underestimating me and my lovers. Although this reason was quite ridiculous, since he was able to form a soul imprint with such a concept, it could only mean that he truly believed in love, and even treated it as his life goal. Personally, I would probably be unable to accept such a chaotic concept of love, but since it was someone else's personal hobby, it wouldn't be convenient for me to comment on it. How could it be possible? Was I such a good person? I was going to write up a proposal and apply for legislation to prevent books with such a different sexual orientation from entering the market. One Beifeng was enough. If books became a tidal wave of Beifeng, would this world still be saved? Although I don't want to admit it, it's most likely the truth. Did he convince you? No. When he said this, he was being fought over by a male water buffalo and a female lizard. There was also a female gorilla crying on the side while tugging on a handkerchief. Since it was so disgusting, he actually dared to act out an 8 o'clock scene in front of me. And he was even a beast. I sent him flying with a wave of arcane missiles. Well done. I gave her a thumbs up, but Heloise was still quite depressed. He also gave me a thumbs up while he was in midair. He was intentionally angering me so that I would send him flying in order to save myself from the situation. Forget it. Let's change the topic. I don't want to know anything about him at all. From a certain standpoint, if it was possible, I really didn't want to know what Beifeng was like at all. But now, even this ancient elemental lord was willing to offer this as a condition. I couldn't help but be impressed by Beifeng's abilities in this area. Right now, the most important thing was to obtain the information I wanted from the Great Stone Sculptor. Since she wanted this draken, I would simply give it to her. After all, this draken's tastes were unparalleled in the world, so it didn't matter. Just as I was planning on having an arranged marriage, Beifeng jumped out on his own. Sister Stone and I are purely brother and sister. Please don't misunderstand. I was astonished to hear this. Beifeng was actually rejecting someone else's proposal? Weren't you supposed to love all non-humans? Unfortunately, no matter how I winked at him, he wouldn't budge at all. He was just like an upright gentleman who argued for what was right, making me sound like an old fuddy-duddy who was trying to force me into a marriage. Heloise? Don't ask me. I don't know anything. Then you know two things. Tell me, how about I transform into a cat and send Beifeng to you? Did you see that lion? He's a distant relative of yours, and he's even male. Although this was the same old trick, it was fine as long as it worked. After all, Beifeng had no interest in Heloise, who was originally an elf. However, it was enough to scare her. As far as I knew, Beifeng was already capable of using his gaze to awaken Heloise's mental trauma. Pure love? Tui. It's strange that Beifeng has such a thing. She has a physical body of stone and can't do anything, but he said something about spiritual love. And when the great stone sculptor transforms into his human form, he's no longer interested in her. Although Heloise's anger was definitely mixed with her personal grudges, I instantly understood, even though I would have preferred not to understand at all. It was quite normal for high-level elemental creatures and dragons to have humanoid forms. However, most powerful individuals would have humanoid forms that weren't too ugly. Once the humanoid form was determined, it would be impossible to change it. The ancient monsters of the world were especially fond of the beautiful high elves. The Stone Mother's humanoid form would most likely be a beauty as well. A normal person's sense of beauty would likely accept Ainslow's elven form, but Ainslow just so happened to be a freak. Even an honest official would find it difficult to resolve family disputes. Even a corrupt official wouldn't be able to interfere with these freaks' family disputes. If it were possible, I would really like to leave. However, it just so happened that I had many things I needed to discuss with Ainslow, and I needed her full cooperation. Was there something else apart from the earth elemental god? Of course there was. My frigid winter earth required other high-quality divine elemental items in order to achieve balance and further perfect it. I had researched this topic in a mage country, but I hadn't found anything. Are you an idiot? If those mages knew about top-quality elemental items, they'd be fighting over them like crazy. Even embedding such items into staffs to buff magic would be a priceless treasure. Would they even leave one for you? Even if their elemental elements aren't compatible, it'd be great to leave one for their disciples and descendants as a family heirloom. At the time, Harlow's words had shattered my hopes of being lucky. However, when I asked the gods, I didn't get an answer. Or perhaps I should say that the answer was the same. Are you an idiot? If I was here, I would have stolen one long ago. Why would I leave one for you? As expected, considering that Bana was the goddess of wealth, it was possible that she knew something. However, the result was the same. It was fortunate that I had given her some small gifts in order to ease the tension between us. However, when I thought about it, I discovered that when it came to elemental divine items, it was likely that nobody would know more than the ancient elemental lords. Elemental creatures had their own circles and worlds. The elemental wars between them had never ceased. And, due to the fact that the elements were mutually exclusive, the elemental creatures were unable to use or control other divine items with elemental seeds. Since they were on guard against their enemies, it was only natural that the elemental creatures would have a deep understanding of their enemies' divine items. Meanwhile, one of my subordinates was an elemental lord who was in the same generation as Omdorokin and the other elemental gods. Of course, I wanted to ask her about this. However, this type of information would definitely be of a high level, so it would be normal for me to try and get on her good side first. But now, Ainslow had obviously fallen in love with Ainslow, and she had even dragged me into this matter since I had a request for her into it. I really didn't want to care about the love affairs of such abnormal creatures, but I just couldn't. In the end, I used the excuse of, I'm about to introduce animal protection laws across the entire Northlands. Yep, I made a deal with you in the past, but it won't be implemented in Sulphur Mountain City. Touching someone else's pet without their owner's permission will be considered trespassing. If you don't want to be hunted down by the Justice Knight, you understand. As an excuse, I made Bayphone promise to give this plump stone princess more chances and at least go on a few dates with her. That was all I could do. Indeed, that was all I could do. After all, I couldn't possibly force this Draken to marry me. If I really forced this Draken to marry me, I felt that it would become a lifelong shame and black history for me. But even at this, Ainslow couldn't help but nod in satisfaction and thank me. It would seem that she was incredibly infatuated with him. Then, when I asked her about it, she hesitated for a moment before telling me, but that only made my head hurt. A true Titan giant's heart? It's a combination of wind and earth elements. Of course, I know that it's a top-quality god item, but isn't this a little too difficult? The stone of gravity that's the core of the Pillar of Wrath in the Swallow region? What do you think you'll do if I take away the foundation of your home? That's right, hunt it down to the very end. There's a mega empire in the Swallow region. Do you think it'll be fun to be hunted down by tens of millions of people? The Devourer ranked 5th on the Calamity rankings? Alright, I heard that it's a type of mutated sandworm, but it's a monster that can easily swallow an entire volcano. What do you want me to do with it? Isn't this a scam? Why is it getting more and more difficult? Although it was slightly better than the previous ones, it was obvious that anything that could survive in the world would be difficult to obtain. And I wouldn't even consider obtaining these Earth Elemental God items. That's strange. Why are they all Earth Elemental God items? Aren't there any other Earth Elemental God items? I asked in astonishment. However, Ainslow, who was just as astonished, didn't seem to be faking it. I thought that you were intending to repair the Earth Elemental Throne. Actually, these are the materials that we're currently searching for as well. Do you want information on other Earth Elemental God items? Although there aren't many, I have some as well. All right then. Judging from her disappointed expression that she couldn't hide, she had her own selfish motives. As long as the Earth Elemental Throne could be repaired, she would naturally be the most likely to become the next Earth Elemental God. However, now obviously wasn't the time for a showdown. I pretended to be a fool and asked for more information. This time, Mother Stone didn't feel any pressure at all. After all, these Earth Elemental God items had nothing to do with them. From a certain standpoint, any Earth Elemental God item that the Earth Elemental Lords had information on would either be impossible to obtain or they weren't ready to be born yet. Naturally, it would be incredibly difficult to obtain. However, if the Earth Elemental Lords encountered any Wind Elemental or other God items that were hostile to them, wearing them would weaken them. Since these Earth Elemental Gods were destined to be treasures to their enemies, the Earth Elemental Gods would naturally think of ways to destroy these Earth Elemental Gods. And if it was truly impossible to destroy these Earth Elemental Gods, they would seal or prevent information about these Earth Elemental God from obtaining these Earth Elemental Gods. In this way, information would be valuable. More than 10,000 years ago, the Halai volcano had, as expected, this information was quite reliable. In fact, Ainslow had personally sealed the Earth Elemental God item. But now, it was my turn to be troublesome. Ding! Congratulations for triggering an epic level quest. Go to the Halai volcano to find. Ding! Congratulations for triggering an epic level quest. Go to the Wing Tribe's former capital, Lays. Such quests began flooding my screen, ranging from the lowest to the highest semi-god rank. However, it would take quite a while to complete all of them. And considering that I needed materials on the same level as the Earth Elemental Throne, it was likely that I wouldn't even need to consider any epic level quests. System notification. This quest difficulty is only based on Ainslow's description. The actual difficulty will be updated based on the quest's progress. Alright then, I knew that there would be more trouble to come. The difficulty was one thing, but the information I obtained was far too outdated. I would still have to investigate whether or not it was real. The Stone Mother's first words were from tens of thousands of years ago. Just comparing the names of the ancient and modern places that Ainslow described would require several historians to do the same. Just organizing the information would require a great deal of effort. Every dog has its day. Just a moment ago, I was still complaining about not having enough information. Now, I had too much information and I needed to go through them one by one. Moreover, the information I had was extremely outdated, which would make the quest results even more of a gamble. A quest that I had worked so hard to complete might end up with nothing at all. It was possible that a small, excellent quest would give me an excellent item. That's true. System, can't you just let me go? If I keep doing these lottery quests, even 3 years won't be enough. You know how I hated lottery quests when I was adventuring back in the day. My luck was terrible. I bought a treasure map with a lot of money, but I ended up getting nothing a few hundred years later. That wasn't even the worst part. One time, I actually chased after a phantom cat that was guarding the treasure for half a month before I realized that the treasure was actually a fish head and a fish bone, which were rarely seen in the mountains. And they were rotten. Back then, I was so disgusted. System notification. You're such an idiot. If you can't do the quest yourself, why don't you find someone to do it for you? You've won 3 consecutive championships in the arena. You've got a professional quest master to do the epic quest for you. And Bear Grylls has taught you how to survive in the wilderness. You only need 998. How come you're already a boss? Why do you always want to do everything yourself? Someone to do it for me. Someone to do it for me. I paused in surprise for a moment, but then came to a realization. You're saying that I can give out quests for those contract heroes to do for me? Yep. As long as I specify the difficulty of the quests and give out rewards, I'll have endless helpers. I'll just need to think of a way to get the reward money. Doesn't that mean I'll have to think of a way to scam money again? Right, it's about time I go to the Bardi capital. It's not good to keep the Dragon Knight Archduke waiting. Chapter 359. Quests for contract heroes weren't limited to just one faction. In fact, since there weren't many participants in the early stages of the game, there weren't many bottlenecks in giving out quests. Basically, any faction on ALS side or any government country could give out quests. However, whether or not the quest would reach the contract heroes would depend on whether or not the system approved them. Since the contract heroes was a platform that provided quests, it was just like how a certain treasure would have both buyer and seller ratings. In order to prevent malicious quest publishers from appearing, the system also had a rating system for quest publishers. But what was slightly different here was that the rating system didn't depend on how many quests had been given out. Instead, it was based on the publisher's identity, past achievements, standpoint, and so on. The main thing was how trustworthy they were. To put it simply, if the Holy Church or any other faction wanted to give out a quest, it would be one thing if they didn't pass the review. Even if they did, the publisher's information would be marked with a black symbol of calamity. From another angle, this meant that the publisher was completely unreliable. If the publisher was still tempted by the promise of benefits, then they deserved their misfortune. Although many of the quests were written by me, they were still completely different in the process. After all, not only would every publisher have their own thoughts, there would always be a difference between planning and execution. However, I never expected that I would still end up causing some trouble. Due to my special identity, I received the highest rating from the Contract Heroes system, which was almost equal to other true gods. This basically meant that the official system would give me priority in completing my quests, and the official system would guarantee that I was a trustworthy employer. This wasn't any special privilege. It was due to my status as a semi-official. From my standpoint, I would definitely do my best to help the Contract Heroes system develop in a positive way. That was why the system gave me the highest rating of trustworthiness. Even though I wasn't a high and mighty god, I still had to worry about the overall situation while working together with everyone else. If there was a problem, the front line would be the first to suffer. Simply put, it was like eating rotten cabbage while worrying about the old emperor's heart. For some reason, I couldn't help but think of the temporary workers who were known as scapegoats. I hoped that I wouldn't end up like them. Cough, cough. Getting back to the main topic, it was quite easy for me to give out my quests. I even mentioned that the information might be outdated and needed to be verified. But on the other hand, the Contract Heroes system wasn't able to help me. Instead, they came to make trouble for me. I needed to pay them. However, this wasn't a problem for me. Although my pouch was completely empty and my justice points had all been taken, it wasn't as if I didn't have any attractive rewards. My reward is an IOU. All right then. I knew that it would be quite shameless of me to refuse to pay the farmers their wages, and that I might even get beaten up by them. However, my promissory note was the equivalent of something, a product of magical engineering. From the very start, those engineers had been my subordinates. The manpower and technology were all mine, and the finished products were all mine as well. And now, Amelia had fallen into an eternal slumber, and her thorn garden was now under my control. She had lost all of her wealth from back in the day. As I was a villain who was always being hunted down and killed, I had dug quite a few holes to prepare for my return. I could easily draw a dozen treasure maps. Maybe I don't have a single cent in my wallet, but I do have some assets. As long as I write out an IOU, I can definitely cash it. Thinking about it this way, I seem to have accidentally become tall, handsome, and rich. Who said that one? 2 meters doesn't meet the requirements? Come out. I swear I won't kill him. I think he'll accept it. Even if he doesn't use those things, he can sell them for money. However, I had still underestimated the power of my promissory note. These new products of magical engineering were completely exclusive products in this world. Perhaps I'd only been testing them slightly on the battlefield here, but they had already achieved astonishing results on the battlefield over there. And it was precisely these results that caused the products of magical engineering and the Night Squadron from the Northlands to become famous in the world. What about the battlefield over there? The Ottoman Empire's battle to defend a water city. While I was busy here, the battle between the former Ottoman Empire's capital, Kajisi, and the current Sea Tribe's capital, the Rain City, Falohi, had reached a stalemate. This city that had been completely submerged by seawater was obviously the home ground of the Sea Tribe and the aquatic species. In this region, the Sea Tribe could easily challenge those of a higher power level. Even a top-level individual might die if they were careless and got surrounded. In such a battlefield, humanity's most proficient human wave tactics were rendered useless. Even the strongest knight would be unable to charge in the water. The heavy armor that the Sea Tribe was so proud of had now become a burden. Even in areas where infantry could barely fight, there was water that was half a person tall. If a heavily armored warrior accidentally slipped and fell, they would never be able to get up again. And for the Sea Tribe, no matter how strong the attacking army was, all they needed to do was keep stirring up trouble, and these unyielding warriors would become food for the fish in the sea. Using ships, traditional wooden ships could be pierced through at any moment. Small ships would be unable to withstand the winds and waves that the Sea Tribe intentionally summoned. Not to mention, gigantic ships wouldn't even be able to be used on such a battlefield. According to the usual battlefield rules, there was no balance to speak of on such a battlefield. No military commander would choose to attack such a dangerous location. But ever since the Ottoman Empire lost its capital, the flames of war here had never stopped. After all, this place was the capital of the Ottoman Empire. This was the military, political, and economic core of a mega-empire. It was the face of all the Ottoman people. When a country's capital was besieged, or even captured, or even massacred, the invaders would often believe that this would destroy the will of the defending country. But in reality, this was the lifelong shame of the country's citizens. They would do everything in their power to wash away this shame. There were far too many such examples in history. However, there would always be people who proudly came up with a so-called surprise attack plan on the enemy's capital. They didn't think about what would happen if the battle turned into a full-scale war right from the start. The king of Winterwolves Dasos had left immortal achievements in the game's history. Such a person wouldn't be simple. Not only that, as his experience and power level increased, he would become more and more experienced and difficult to deal with. The difference between ordinary people and ambitious people was that when faced with a seemingly hopeless situation, ordinary people would feel despair or even anger. They would be surrounded by negative emotions and be forced to solve the problem. However, for ambitious people, a predicament was also a type of opportunity. They would face danger head-on and laugh as they turned the danger into their own opportunity. Indeed, Roland had lost his capital city. However, he directly built a new warring capital less than 30 kilometers away from Rain City. That city was still called Kagursi, and the architectural style of the capital city was intentionally imitating the capital city, as if it was only a secondary city of the capital city. Roland also led a team of soldiers to patrol his capital city every day, regardless of rain or shine. Every day, countless people and resources would pass by the Ottoman city walls. Every morning and every evening, the emperor and empress could be seen waving at the citizens who came to reinforce them. Every time they counterattacked, he would stand at the very front. Even if the sea giant's angry roars were right beside his ears, he would never waver. Our emperor. 2 years ago, this title would only refer to him because of his status. But now, it was a title of respect from the bottom of the hearts. It should be known that the forbidden spell that created the Rain City was still in effect. The Rain City was expanding its territory every day. Sooner or later, this city would be submerged. Since the new capital wasn't too far away from the Rain City, the powerful sea monsters that were able to leave the water for a short period of time would often launch surprise attacks. Even so, he still persisted in the new Kajisi city, repelling the sea monster surprise attacks time and time again. The battle was indeed unfavorable for the Ottoman Empire. Even if they occasionally regained lost territory, they would soon lose it again. Their counterattack had already reached the 67th wave, but they still hadn't gained anything substantial. But looking at it from a different angle, the Ottoman people had already gotten used to the Sea Tribe's fighting style and the endless tug-of-war. The younger generation had also grown up in battle. The entire country had been mobilized, and the entire country's national power and industry had been converted from a peaceful era to a war-torn era. Although they didn't win every time, they didn't lose. That's right, they didn't lose. Every time they counterattacked, they would always do so with the premise that they wouldn't lose. They would ambush a certain area, kill the Sea Tribe there, and then swiftly retreat. In actual combat, they actually used 30% of the Sea Tribe's forces as the vanguard and 70% of the Sea Tribe's forces as reinforcements. Although this was quite passive and wouldn't be able to obtain decisive results, Judging from how there were fewer and fewer Sea Tribe members in the surrounding areas, the Sea Tribe seemed to have lost their confidence in conquering everything. Even though the expanded Rain City was now less than 10 kilometers away from the new Kajisi, the ambitious Desos still patiently gathered his troops. He even turned the new Rain City into a training ground for hunting and training. As the ruler of a quasi-mega empire, Desos had the confidence to be willful. If he considered things from a purely rational point of view, he could even ignore the fall of the capital. After the past 2 years of war, his father and brother's remaining officials died in battle. Originally, a powerful emperor's authority would grow endlessly during war. The current Desos had completely taken control of the entire country. All right then, of course, there was also his wisest and most trusted good friend and his most beautiful and gentle empress. The former had become the #1 prime minister of the Ottoman Empire, while the latter was viewed by more and more Ottoman citizens as the perfect woman in their hearts. However, among the closest officials, all of them knew that the empress was only second to Desos. From various points of view, the Ottoman Empire had already surpassed the powerful country in the game's history. As for their opponents, the Sea Folk's country, even though they still occupied Rain City, wasn't doing too well in all aspects. More and more Sea Folk tribes were entering Rain City. The warm sunlight, free beaches, and warm meat made the Sea Folk's leaders wild with joy. However, at the same time, the Sea Folk's fighting spirit was also worn down. The Sea Folk only looked forward to occupying more half of the continent and the entertainment venues in the capital. Instead, they focused all of their energy on internal strife. Those who ate cooked meat wanted to eat more, and those who enjoyed the warm sunlight even learned to wear noble clothing that wouldn't allow them to enter the water. The blacksmiths that forged weapons no longer had any customers. Instead, all sorts of restaurants and bars began opening for business again. Even the underwater concert hall started playing strange music again. Since resources were still limited, even with the Sea Tribe's new royalty restraining them, internal strife continued to occur. After all, the Sea Tribe were all tribes, and they were already used to fighting amongst themselves. The so-called new royalty was only one of them in the past, and their reputation wasn't enough to suppress the Sea Tribe's internal strife. The Sea Tribe didn't care at all about the humans' counterattacks that were becoming more and more powerful. They only passively waited for the Rain City to expand, believing that this would be enough. In their minds, the humans wouldn't dare to enter the deep waters to start a full-scale war, and their enemies were the other Sea Tribe members who wanted to fight for power. Perhaps it would be a good thing for a few more Sea Tribe members to die. While the Sea Tribe was busy fighting for power, the Sea Tribe also united against the Sea Tribe members. This situation actually allowed the weaker humans to regain the initiative in the war. And it just so happened that the Sea Tribe's guardian goddess Lady Storm, who had absolute authority over the Sea Tribe, had sunk into a strange silence. All right, after she was injured by Ale, due to certain reasons, her former ally, the water elemental goddess, also withdrew all of her direct subordinates, leaving only a few low-level water elemental creatures behind. The absolute authority of the Sea Tribe didn't care about the Sea Tribe at all, which further intensified the chaos and internal strife. Under such circumstances, Desos organized the 68th Crusade against the Sea Tribe. But this time, the goal wasn't just to kill off a few Sea Tribe members. It was also at this time that Renee and her Northlands Legion arrived. Together with them was the Envy Marcelet, who had sworn to take revenge. Chapter 360. If I had any other choice, I really wouldn't want to come here. This place doesn't give me any good memories. At the welcoming banquet that Desos organized, Renee's blunt words as the representative of the reinforcements instantly caused the atmosphere to quiet down. Your Highness Renee is truly a straightforward person. The past always makes people sigh, but today is a happy day, so let's not talk about it for now. Your Highness, you're truly the pride of the Northlands, the Night Princess, to be able to cast aside your personal grudges and make the correct choice. However, Desos maintained his gentlemanly smile and led the applause. Everyone around him hurriedly followed suit and applauded. Only then did the situation not become awkward for too long. Indeed, how could Renee possibly have a good impression of Kajisi? First, she was forced to sign a subservient alliance that took advantage of Kajisi's precarious position. Then, she was forced to marry Kajisi. If this was a female-oriented romance novel, it would probably be considered a national grudge or a family grudge. What followed would probably be a love-hate relationship that would entangle her for the rest of her life. Alright, since this wasn't the style, there was no need to think too much about it. At the very least, it seemed that Renee's grudges weren't small at all. However, her arrival here was indeed justifiable. After all, during the war against the Beastmen in the Northlands, the Ottoman Empire sent out knight squadrons and diplomatic squadrons to aid the humans. No matter whether or not they were effective in the end, the Ottoman Empire's White Wolf Knight didn't retreat even when facing the poison god. They still fought for the humans in desperate times, so Roland and Hermit were still grateful. Plus, the Ottoman Empire was currently the Northland's largest trading partner and aid provider. Roland and Hermit had signed a bunch of agreements in Definder. At the very least, they were still allies, and they seemed to have a very good relationship with each other. There were only a few main battlefields in the Pan-continent. If Renee wanted to train her troops and earn justice points, she only had a few choices: the battlefield against the undead or the battlefield against the aquatic species. As for the Northlands Knight, no matter if it was the Aurora Knight that controlled ice or the 4 elemental swordcasters that controlled magic swords, they didn't have an obvious advantage against the undead. However, with the help of the Aurora Knight and the battleships, they weren't afraid to fight in the water. So, she unhesitatingly chose this backup option. Not only would this be an advantage for training her troops, it would also be a political consideration. The Northlands countries were trying to re-establish their own prestige. It would be far too passive for them to stay in a corner of the continent. From a certain standpoint, Renee was taught by many excellent teachers and wasn't stupid to begin with. After she regained her self-confidence, she was far more mature than Roland had expected. Just her arrival and the arrival of the Ottoman Empire's fleet greatly increased the morale of the Ottomans. That was because the Borealis was currently the only airship in the entire continent that possessed such a rare aerial battleship. At the time, some people felt embarrassed when they saw the cheering crowd below them. That was because the Borealis had actually been stolen from the Ottoman Empire. But since the owner didn't even know about it, there was nothing they could do about it. The Borealis's 7-star Guardian Squadron was still under construction. Only the Mizar had come. The entire airship fleet consisted of 1 super battleship, 1 heavy battleship, and more than 20 small speedboats. However, there were also nearly 100 Aurora Knight and more than 204 elemental swordcasters accompanying the Borealis. It could be said that Renee had brought along her main force and intended to go all out. Of course, Olivia's alchemists and engineers were also with her. It would be far too much of a waste for such a large airship to only carry her own people. Along the way, she brought along more than 1,200 adventurers at 4 previously agreed upon gathering points. However, due to the limited number of seats available, anyone who wanted to board the airship would have to go through a selection process. Most of them were contract heroes and the strong. Approximately 700 of them were contract heroes. Most of the remaining adventurers were still observing or hadn't managed to become the first batch of contract heroes. Of course, there was no need to mention whether or not a certain princess was trying to recruit new warriors along the way. As for Dasos, he didn't feel good facing the Northland's princess who didn't hide her resentment at all. Renee was polite and considerate to everyone else, but she was incredibly cold toward him. Although Roland was smiling as if he didn't care, he was actually feeling more and more annoyed inside. The reason? It was actually quite bearable for him to be treated coldly. After all, she was his reinforcements. The only reason Dasos couldn't sleep at night was because of her familiar face. As he looked at this face that was exactly the same as Roland's face, he couldn't help but recall his dark history that had been buried in the darkness. He fell in love with a man and even proposed to her multiple times in public. Just thinking about this made him want to hug his head and cry. The worst part was that when he saw this face, he discovered that he mysteriously missed that person. This made him want to cry, but no tears came out. That was why every time he saw Renee, he would mysteriously feel his heart move. Their identical faces would always remind him of that person's every frown or smile, which would make him feel even more pained. It was as if a wound that had already healed was torn open again, and salt was viciously poured on it. Am I really a gay? The pitiful emperor had never doubted himself so much. Feeling helpless, he could only go to his beloved empress for comfort. However, facing the emperor who was wavering, the Empress Rosemary seemed indifferent, but when she thought of her true identity, she felt that it was a little funny. Still, she used her own way to comfort the emperor. In the end, she even said, "Don't think so much. No matter what, Her Highness Renee is a woman. If you fall in love with her, it proves that you're normal." All right, this comfort seemed to be of some use. At the very least, Dasos felt much better at that time. She's still unmarried, right? For an emperor who had strong desires, it was only natural for him to get what he wanted. After discovering that it was only natural for him to fall in love with her, he even had evil intentions towards Renee. However, that very night, his extravagant hopes were extinguished. When a spy from the palace came to tell him that Renee had actually brought two beautiful adventurers into her room, and that those delightful things had happened in her room, he was once again stunned. So, she also likes women. Then, am I really not normal? Or, she's Roland herself, and she's just hiding it from me. However, through the secret investigation of the maid, that Renee was actually a woman. This time, the emperor suffered a heavy psychological blow again. Does the person I love like women? From a certain standpoint, the result of Darsos, who was becoming more and more famous as a ruler, suffering yet another blow to his personal feelings, was that his own sexual orientation was even more shaken. He could only seek comfort from his female confidant, once again. Speaking of which, if he knew the truth about his empress, would he directly jump off a building and commit suicide? Or perhaps he would simply take a 180-degree turn and write a poem that transcended history. You hate that I was born late, and I hate that you were born early. In my entire life, what I hate the most is that I still can't forget you even before I die. Generally speaking, those classic lines that transcended time were mostly about the author's bone-deep feelings and unimaginable experiences. However, this phrase was later used to describe a couple who had an extremely good relationship. Wasn't it a bit wrong to use this phrase? Since it came from Dasos, at least it couldn't be used to describe heterosexual love. As for what exactly happened in the room, in order not to be confused, it was better to just imagine it. In any case, there was only one sentence. Heterosexual love was for the sake of reproduction, while homosexual love was true love. What? I'm really not a senior member of the FFF mercenary group. This is the truth. There's no need to prove it. Why don't you just go out on the streets and ask some random people? Cough, cough. Back to the main topic. Actually, it wasn't Renee's fault. She really didn't do it on purpose. Why would she think so much? All she did was leave the custody of a certain guardian and pay for the tuition of a certain demon prince. And even if she refused to pay, she probably wouldn't be able to stop that demon prince from collecting it himself. Getting back to the main topic, from a certain standpoint, it couldn't be said that Dasos had reached his current level because he had bad intentions or bad luck. Perhaps it was simply fate, or perhaps the god of fate didn't want this ambitious individual to have such a smooth life. No matter which generation Dasos was from, no matter if it was in politics or personal life, he definitely wasn't a good person. Yet, it seemed that he was just as unlucky. Compared to the Dark Elf Empress in history, Empress Rosemary was at least in a much better situation. Perhaps she would even have a descendant who could inherit the throne. Roland, an undead child? Wait a moment, I'm researching it right now. But no matter how complicated Roland's feelings were, how many times he vomited blood in private, and how many times he sought comfort from the Empress, the war still had to continue. Roland also had to act like he was full of fighting spirit and confidence. At the very least, he couldn't allow his personal feelings to affect national affairs, and he couldn't allow his wavering to affect the morale of the entire army on the battlefield. Roland had a smile on his face every day as he inspected the soldiers and held meetings. If Roland knew that Roland was working so hard, he would probably give him a thumbs up and praise him. You've worked so hard, sacrificing yourself for the sake of the people. You're truly a good public servant of the Ottoman people. As for Renee, she might even hold a celebration party to celebrate Dasos's misfortune. After all, ever since she was born, Dasos was the person she hated the most because he had threatened her. If it wasn't for Roland's appearance, perhaps the Donglon Principality would have become a vassal state of the Ottoman Empire. Even Renee herself would have married someone she didn't like or even know. That was why she didn't even try to hide her dissatisfaction towards Dasos. But on another level, even though they were at war for a long time, the Ottoman Empire still obediently carried out the aid contract with the Donglon Principality. Although there was the fatal restriction of the Devil's Contract, there were still loopholes in the contract. The Ottoman Empire even delivered more aid resources than usual. This was also a favor and investment. That was why Renee arrived. The moment she arrived in the city, she was already known by the Ottoman people. There were even queues lining the streets to welcome her. The Ottoman people still remembered the astonishing performance of the angelic Renee in the arena. The Ottoman nobles and knights still remembered how this knight princess charged into the enemy's territory alone in order to save her family and friends. In their hearts, the young knight princess was already the role model of an ancient knight. As for the filth and infighting, it was impossible for ordinary citizens to know about it. Only the higher-ups of both sides knew about it. On the surface, it was the friendly alliance between both sides. The young knight princess won the recognition of the emperor with her outstanding courage and abilities. Considering the princess' potential, the emperor made an inexplicable decision. He took the initiative to change her country from a subordinate to an equal one and gave her a large amount of aid resources. The emperor, who recognized talent, soon received rewards. The knight princess returned to her homeland and made her homeland stronger. She even defeated the ferocious Beastman army. And now, when the Ottoman Empire is in trouble, the knight princess brought her knight order to fulfill her duty as an ally. All right, this was what the outside world thought. It could totally be made into a good drama. But although it seemed completely logical, it was actually far from the truth. It was like the difference between life on the news and reality. Actually, no matter which world it was the same. By the time the official media made an announcement, who knew how many things had already happened? Naturally, it was impossible to completely equate it with the truth. The result was quite amusing. The leaders of both countries had opinions about each other. But in the eyes of outsiders, the two countries had an excellent relationship with each other. They had even reached an agreement on military and economic matters. Just look at the Ottoman Empire's endless aid resources. They even sent a knight to the north as reinforcements. Donglon even gave the Ottoman Empire their national treasure, the floating battleship technology. The two countries are basically brothers wearing the same pants. And from a certain standpoint, this wasn't wrong. At the very least, when a country's empress was completely leaning towards a certain country, this unique alliance might last for a very long time. Cough. Let's get back to the main topic. This was the 68th counterattack, and it was also the most important counterattack. The strategic target of the attack was the former docks area. That's right, the area where the underwater base was located. It was the Ottoman Empire's most important strategic target. But now it was the playground of a bunch of gigantic sea beasts. All right, then, we all knew that the strategic point had changed. A certain person had secretly taken away the most important treasure. However, he didn't take things too far. He left behind all the information and equipment that were inconvenient to take away. For the Ottoman Empire, as long as this chest was opened, the treasure within would definitely be worth any sacrifice. Of course, that certain person never had any good intentions. He had always been waiting for the other party to open the chest. His slightly more advanced design ideas and key technology that just happens to be lacking had long since become impatient. Once the other party unlocked their technology tree, my salesman would immediately arrive. High-tech products packed into boxes and delivered to your doorstep. Once you have one, You'll save 10 years of hard work. It's not 988, not 688, and definitely not 488. It's only 418. 418, if you buy one set, you'll get 2 free random lottery chests containing top-level magical engineering technology. If you buy 2 sets, you'll get 5 free random lottery chests. You got a Roland brand New Year gift pack. Exclusive business. What are you hesitating for? Hurry up and call the order hotline. What? You want to specifically ask for a certain key technology? You don't want to draw? Haha. Dear customer, you don't seem to understand the industry. Do you know what an exclusive business is? It means that only I'm selling it, and I can sell it however I want. I have the final right to explain, while you only have the right to make suggestions. You can say it's fine, but I don't know if I'll listen or not. Do you know what a random lottery and bundled sale is? It means that before you buy what you want, you'll first buy a bunch of free gifts for me. Do you know what it means to save 10 years of hard work once you have one? It means that if you don't buy it, you'll forever fall behind by 10 years. How can ordinary players possibly defeat players with money? It was a pity that this advertisement that Roland personally wrote wasn't used in the end. The main reason was that it was too malicious. Considering how a certain emperor's mood was getting worse and worse, Rosemary was worried that Desos wouldn't be able to hold it in any longer and would directly die. Thus, she tossed the matter of the transaction to the Empire's Prime Minister, Hermit. And so, it was Hermit's turn to be angered to the point of having to send a priest for emergency treatment. Let's not think about the future for now. Right now, let's focus back on the past. Since the war broke out at dawn, it symbolized the Ottoman Empire's all-out counterattack. And so, the counterattack, codenamed Operation Daybreak, began. And at this time, Renée met with unexpected reinforcements. They were 3 full-fledged night squadrons. The most eye-catching among them was a group of grayish-black elves. Their emblem was a crescent moon, and their battle flag also had traces of a full moon. And one of their leaders was someone that Renée was familiar with. Diana? Victoria? Why are you guys here as well? Chapter 361. There is probably no need to investigate how Victoria met up with Diana, but from a certain standpoint, the passionate meeting between a queen and a king in history was even more noteworthy. Unfortunately, relationships between people were often affected by many factors. Although the 2 lovers had indeed met at a banquet, there hadn't been much of a commotion between them. Those who knew the truth felt that it was a pity. Yep, that insider was none other than Roland himself, who had been taking pleasure in Diana's misfortune the entire time. Aren't you afraid that if Desos really falls in love with Victoria and finds out that the woman he loves still likes other women, he'll be so desperate that he'll turn gay and come looking for you? All right then, of course, such an unreliable threat wouldn't scare Roland too much. But the price of being disgusted was that the silly cat would be brutally abused afterwards. But now, on the eve of war, the arrival of the 2 female elves and the Moonlight Goddess's army was undoubtedly a good thing. Eternal praise to our great moon goddess Patricia. May her love encompass us. May her light illuminate our path. And may her gaze always be with us. The Moonlight Goddess Patricia was a powerful god under Ale. As a powerful true god, she had many divine concepts, including moon and moonlight, guardian of the lost, dormant, dream, purify, watch, and hunt. Although she belonged to the elven faction, her believers included humans, elves, rangers, professional hunters, and so on. She also had many armed forces under her command, but she had actually been quite close to Ale for a long time. But after she transformed most of her divine power into a starlight net, she had fallen to mid-level divine power. The starlight net would become a tracking and surveillance device across the entire mortal plane. Any otherworldly existence that entered the mortal plane would be discovered immediately. The Moonlight Goddess would become even more powerful as she obtained merits and believers, and the priests of the Moonlight Goddess Church would become the most reliable tracking hounds. Originally, doing this much would have been more than enough. However, as one of the most loyal supporters of the Air faction, she didn't intend to remain a nobody under the main god's protection. In fact, she even took action before the Holy War began. She was one of the powerful gods to begin with. Once she started a war, she would have many believers. And because she had been fighting against Rose and the other evil gods for a long time, she had many powerful warriors among her believers. Once they were armed and organized, they would become a truly powerful force. Since the warriors were loyal followers of Ale, they naturally became members of the contract heroes. This time, they took the initiative to participate in this battle. The Grey Elves under the moonlight were the collective name of the former Dark Elves who had chosen the path of justice, and the moonlight's sacred emblem on their arms was their symbol. Following Rose's downfall, the originally suppressed Dark Elves also had a chance to make a new choice. In just 2 short years, the number of Grey Elves had increased by more than 10 times. If it weren't for the fact that time was still too short, their numbers would have increased explosively. Meanwhile, Diana, who was searching for the source of her faith, responded to her god's call and joined the Grey Elves in battle. However, perhaps only she knew that her journey alone wasn't for the sake of pursuing faith. On the contrary, it was because she had gotten too close to the gods and understood the truth about the gods that her faith was about to collapse. It seemed to be an expedition in pursuit of glory, but more than that, it was an escape from the truth. Faith was incredibly common in this world. In fact, it was a concept that actually existed. And to most mortals, true gods were existences far more important than their own lives. It was no exaggeration to say that a true god was more important than one's own life. As a holy knight, Diana used to believe in the holy light and hoped that the holy light would point out the path of salvation for her. But one day, a certain man casually said something that almost caused her faith in the holy light to collapse. As a holy knight, you don't believe in the God of holy light? Of course I don't believe in the God of holy light. I only believe in the divine light itself. Who would worship an existence that has no sense of self? That man, or perhaps I should say that he was the incarnation of a certain god in the He continent, showed her the truth about the gods. Or, more accurately, he used his actions to tell her that the gods were nothing special. They were just slightly older, slightly more powerful ancient existences, and that all of their miracles could be explained by the natural laws. If that was all there was to it, she could still accept it. But what Diana found the most difficult to accept was his understanding of the true gods. It would have been fine if he was purely an anti-god, but he just happened to have divine favor that nobody could understand. It could even be said that he was a god himself. In the future, if you choose to study law, I'd also advise you not to worship the god of law himself. Instead, you should study law itself, understand it, love it, and even become a faith. And if you're unable to recognize everything that law represents, then you should unhesitatingly give up on it. Worship is the furthest distance from a truth. Faith. Of course I have faith. Otherwise, how could I possibly become the guardian of law? You feel that there's something different? Of course, it's different. To be honest, I feel that your faith is filled with utilitarianism, which makes me feel quite uncomfortable. Your faith is far too impure. Rich merchants worship the goddess of wealth because they hope that she'll bestow them with fortune. Farmers worship the god of harvest because they hope that they'll be able to have a good harvest next year. The god of war's faith has never been broken, but that's because victory in battle is forever the sweetest thing ever. Perhaps I'm the most devout believer here. I believe in the true God only because I agree with the ideals that he represents. I believe that law is correct, which is why I promote law. I hope that law will be able to make the world better, but I don't hope that law will do anything for me personally. Pure faith? Diana understood Roland's words and thought about it. However, she almost ended up becoming a former holy knight. From a certain standpoint, this female knight was far too pure. Pure to the point of being cute, pure to the point of being silly. Because she was pure, she refused the many temptations and desires of the dark elf world. Because she was pure, she believed that the holy light could save her entire species. Because she was pure, she had pure faith. She gave everything to the holy light, which actually allowed her to grow even stronger. But in the end, because she was pure, She listened to a certain person's lies and almost tormented herself to death. Actually, every generation had a different understanding of faith. In a certain dark generation on Earth, Diana's attitude of giving everything to the gods was the choice of most people. Believing in a certain god, even after death, even one soul would be returned to that god's divine kingdom. However, a certain person's understanding of gods and faith leaned towards the end of the age of chaos. That was, I think you're fine, so I'll follow you. But if you deviate from your original beliefs, I'm sorry, but I'll have to rebel against you. Faith? Divine power server? You're a god, but you're looking down on the gods? The most dangerous part was that even Roland didn't know about his identity being leaked. Womian's was the Lich Roland, and the Lich Roland was the Holy Knight Roland. When Diana saw this, the female Holy Knight felt that this was the same as a true god speaking the truth. Perhaps as long as we recognize and understand the concepts and teachings that the gods represent, we'll be able to borrow the gods' power. In that case, perhaps we can also take the initiative to steal the gods' power and even become true gods. All right then. It was quite obvious that Diana had misunderstood Roland's words. She was simply thinking about how to obtain more power. This was indeed the mainstream view in this world. Most people who became Holy Knight didn't believe in the Holy Light from the very start. They only believed in the Holy Light to earn a living and obtain power. Most other divine job class members were like this as well. However, the price for obtaining power was that they were offering their everything to the gods. Even in death, Holy Light job class members were still Holy Light job class members. So-called former Holy Light job class members had most likely been hunted down and killed. Due to Rose's death, the Dark Elves' divine world directly collapsed, and a large number of former priests and divine job class members appeared. Many Dark Elves lost their purpose in life after losing their faith in Rose. However, many former priests and holy knights who lost their power were constantly searching for new sources of power. One such example was Diana's younger sister, Victoria. It would have been fine if Diana had been the only one thinking about this. However, her younger sister just happened to be a former high priestess candidate for Rose. She had access to a tremendous amount of God's knowledge, and she had many former Rose priests working under her. She herself was also an excellent priest. When Diana communicated her thoughts with her younger sister, she decided to experiment. That's right, it was her, not them. Diana still belonged to the standard order and good faction, while Victoria was a typical dark elf. She would only care about the results and wouldn't care about the process or sacrifices. In this idealistic world, there were many times when there wasn't only one correct answer. Extreme stubbornness could even create another path. This 1.5 years of exploration had already given birth to creations that shouldn't have appeared in this world. Desecration priests and anti-holy knight, divine power stealers, and divine job desecrators. Roland would never have imagined that his casual words would create such a ridiculously powerful job class. In this battle, the first to suffer were the Sea Tribe. From the very start, the main characters of this battle weren't the Ottoman Empire. Instead, it was the girls from the Northlands. On this excellent stage, the new Northlands faction showed off their astonishing potential. Chapter 362. The battle wasn't going well. It should be said that not a single person had any optimistic expectations for this battle. The main strategic target was the docks of the main battlefield, which was currently several dozen meters underwater. The Sea Tribe referred to this area as the Dragon's Graveyard. The blood of the semi-god, nine-headed dragon dripped here, and although the remaining dragon blood was highly toxic to ordinary life forms, it was still irresistibly attractive to other sea beasts. A large number of giant sea beasts gathered there. In order to reach the Dragon's Graveyard, the Sea Tribe would have to kill at least 10 street blocks of the Sea Tribe. Once the battle reached a stalemate, it was likely that the Sea Tribe's reinforcements would soon arrive. That was why Desos and his advisors had done their homework for this battle. Out of the 60 or so previous counterattacks, at least 10 of them had chosen to break through the Dragon's Graveyard. This wasn't only for the sake of gathering information and eliminating potential threats. It was also a psychological tactic to numb the Sea Tribe. The dragon's graveyard is being attacked again? I really don't understand why humans like to attack this place. Who cares what they're doing? Just leave it to the sea beasts to deal with. Actually, for the current sea tribe, the most important strategic point was their royalty and divine temple. The second most important was their various entertainment facilities. As for the original docks where the sea beasts gathered, did the sea tribe even need boats? They would rather raise pigs, sea beasts there. Out of the previous 5 attacks, 2 of them had chosen to break through the dragon's graveyard. Perhaps the sea tribe's deployment was still quite timely, but the frontline warriors had already sharply discovered that the sea tribe's reactions had begun to slow down. At the very least, the reinforcement from other locations had arrived 30% later than before, and the number of reinforcements had decreased by at least half. Since the sea tribe had already become numb to such attacks, it was now time to launch a true counterattack. Dawn had arrived. There was still more than an hour before the warm sunlight would illuminate this world. Right now, most of the sea tribe were still in a deep sleep. They would only wake up after 9 o'clock in the morning, and this was the time of the day when they slept the most soundly. Unlike the pitch-black depths of the sea tribe began to imitate the schedules of other species after feeling the warmth of the sun. However, perhaps from the day when the sea tribe believed that they had already achieved victory and arrogantly gave up the initiative in this battle, they were destined to meet such a fate. As the instigators of the war, the Ottoman Empire did not hesitate to stand at the forefront. In that battle and the civil strife, their main fleet suffered heavy losses. The 3 major fleets were all scattered, but in this counterattack, the number of warships that participated in the war and the new warships added up to more than 30 heavy warships and 100 medium warships. This was the confidence of a mega-empire. Once they entered a period of war, a large number of civilian and commercial industries would be converted into military industries. If they couldn't crush them in a single move, their deep foundation of industry would drag any opponent into a hell of a long war. Obviously, the original battleships wouldn't be able to fight in such an environment. The water here was too shallow, and the water was too complicated. Even in areas with deep drains, a building that was previously on land might become a fatal reef. However, it was impossible to fight against the sea tribe in the water without a battleship. Originally, the Ottoman Empire had fallen into a dilemma. However, after obtaining the technology for floating battleships, they finally came up with a solution. The valuable information from the Northlands had already been spread to every single Ottoman shipyard. All the shipwrights and designers hadn't rested since that day. The Ottoman Empire focused all of its efforts on modifying their own ships. It was still impossible for the Ottoman Empire to completely float in the air. They would have to design, choose materials, enchant, and assemble the ship bit by bit from the keel. However, it was possible to simply install floating engines, reduce the ship's total weight, and lower the ship's draft. Perhaps this didn't seem meaningful, but it actually provided a possibility. The bottom of the ship would be fully metallized. If the ship was lighter, there would be extra buoyancy. Wouldn't it be possible to install heavy armor on the ship? And so, with the help of countless blacksmiths, the thick protective armor was patched on. In order to ensure that the armor would be strong enough to crush a reef without being damaged, the Ottoman Empire madly used precious magical metals. Magical metals were treasures that ordinary adventurers wouldn't even be willing to use to create weapons. According to the post-war statistics, the magical metals used on the ships had caused the Ottoman Empire's treasury to lose 1/5 of its wealth. That was enough to rebuild the capital of Kajisi. At a time when ironclad warship technology was still immature and engine technology was still lacking, All-in shipsmiths had actually combined floating technology and created a half-finished ironclad warship. It was truly a sight to behold. Unlike their cousins on Earth, ironclad ships here didn't need to worry about the cannons used to defend against other ships. Instead, they needed to worry about the reefs that they might encounter at the bottom of the ship. Once the engine technology was mastered, true heavy ironclad ships would definitely arrive in this era. But for now, these half-finished ironclad ships were more than enough. Compared to the original ships, they had even more astonishing defensive capabilities. Since they were equipped with an excessive amount of anti-gravity engines, they also had the ability to float in the air for a short period of time. Dasos, not enough buoyancy? Then let's build more engines. If they overload and explode, we'll just replace them with new ones. Bring enough workers to the ships. We have mages to provide magic power. We have enough industrial capacity. We have money. Be willful. The people of this world weren't stupid. When an intelligent species was pushed to their limits, all sorts of seemingly wonderful modifications would achieve miraculous results that regular armies would never be able to achieve. Of course, if it wasn't for the fact that the Ottoman Empire's metallurgy, especially the forging of alloys, surpassed all other countries' industrial standards, even if they had such ideas, they wouldn't have been able to achieve them. All right, the most important thing was that the Ottoman Empire was rich enough. War was a competition of overall national strength. As super rich, the Ottoman Empire could be willful. In order to cover up the fragile wooden planks that didn't have any armor, and in order to fight at night, these battleships were painted black. In the near future, these black battleships that always brought doom to their enemies will be called death battleships. This was doubtlessly a trump card. Even during the most dangerous times on the battlefield, even though countless warriors' bodies became meat targets for the sea tribe in the water, these modified battleships were still repeatedly modified in their warehouses. They had no intention of being used on the battlefield at all. This type of modified battleship can achieve miraculous results the first time it's used on the battlefield. What kind of trump card is this if it can't be used at a critical moment and obtain the strategic key that will determine the outcome of the battle? As an emperor, Dasos was obviously incredibly ruthless. And right now, all the sacrifices had been made. This trump card that had been hidden for so long had achieved astonishing results. Nobody was able to stop this black battleship as it traveled through the night. Their gigantic bodies were incredibly agile, and if they got stuck on a reef, they would be able to float for a short period of time in the air, which was even more inconceivable. There were no more reefs in the water where these heavy battleships passed. In fact, there weren't even any large sea tribe members. Their sturdy hulls were more than enough to flatten everything. When the alarm bells rang, the sea tribe members had no idea how to deal with such battleships when they first arrived on the battlefield. Dig through the bottom of the battleships? The protective deck of the battleship was a combination of magical metal coating and steel plates, which was more than enough to deal with cannons. Although the sea giant's rusty anchors managed to pierce through the outer layer of the battleship, they were actually embedded in the battleship and dragged away. Tossed giant waves to drown the sea giants? These battleships were far too stable. They were even capable of automatically adjusting the depth of the water. Ordinary water mages wouldn't be able to drown these huge iron blocks that could be adjusted by their anti-gravity engines. It would be better to use forbidden spells instead, using cannons to attack the weakest parts of the sea tribe's upper body. The sea tribe didn't have cannons, and the sea tribe's mages were actually suppressed by the sea tribe's mages, who outnumbered them by more than 3-1. The Ottoman Empire's superiority in metallurgy and smithing was far too obvious. The Ottoman Empire's patented technologies, such as full-body alloy armor and exploding magical alloys, were the best evidence. The sea tribe's magical metal coating was still the Ottoman Empire's best alloy technology. Not to mention the sea tribe's cold weapons and hands. Even ordinary fifth circle magic spells would be useless against it. Both sides had completely different attitudes towards this battle. Naturally, the results would be completely different. Unfortunately, even though the sea tribe and the sea tribe were both on the sea tribe's side, and even though the sea tribe's advance was relatively smooth, they still didn't have much of an advantage in the first half an hour of the battle. Although the sea tribe's advance was quite smooth, they didn't have the most anticipated spoils of war, a large number of casualties among the sea tribe. In such a special battlefield, it was impossible for the sea tribe to occupy the sea tribe's territory. Therefore, the sea tribe's first priority was to eliminate the sea tribe's forces. However, the result was disappointing. The sea tribe didn't have many casualties, and the number of high-level sea tribe members who died could be counted on one hand. The reason? No matter what, it was still the first reason: geographical advantage. Yes, the Sea Tribe couldn't do anything to the Sea Tribe's huge battleships, but the huge battleships couldn't do anything to the Sea Tribe either. For the Sea Tribe, as long as they could dive into the deep water and escape far away, what could the huge battleships that had to stay on the surface of the water do to them? The speed of these large pieces of iron was extremely slow. Attack with cannons? Even the stupidest commander wouldn't make such a decision. Magic attack? How much magic power could a mage gain from the seawater? Using a crossbow to shoot a huge harpoon? That would be useful, but the Sea Tribe with high intelligence wouldn't just stand there and watch the enemy attack. As long as the Sea Tribe could keep a distance, the harpoon would be useless. Send people into the water to chase after the Sea Tribe? This was an excellent idea. To the Sea Tribe, this was a stupid idea that was almost like colluding with the enemy. This was basically giving the Sea Tribe more food. The Sea Tribe had been waiting for the humans to chase after them for far too long. On the flagship of the Sea Tribe's fleet, the evil shark, Dasos, was also secretly anxious. He had considered many situations in his battle simulation, but the Sea Tribe's losses were still less than he had expected. It was possible to achieve the strategic goal of reducing the Sea Tribe's forces. In that case, even if the Sea Tribe conquered the docks, the Sea Tribe's subsequent counterattack would be astonishing. Not to mention, these modified battleships weren't invincible. As time passed, their weaknesses would also be discovered. Meanwhile, on the floating battleship in the clouds, Renee and the others were also looking at the battlefield in astonishment. Perhaps it was because her continuous victories had given her confidence that she didn't think too highly of the Ottoman Empire, which had repeatedly suffered losses at Roland's hands. But today, when she saw these suddenly rising battleships, she finally understood what it meant to be a superpower. The Donglan Principality was also building battleships. In terms of technology, they were even ahead of the Ottoman Empire. However, there wasn't a single decent shipyard in the entire Donglan Principality. Not only that, their metallurgy and smithing techniques were extremely backward. Otherwise, they wouldn't have forced Roland to use necromancy to build battleships. But even so, the resources and funds required to build a large battleship were astronomical. Even the maintenance costs after it was built weren't cheap. The Aurora battleship was a living battleship. Envy would devour and evolve itself to recover from its injuries, so that it wouldn't drain the entire treasury of Donglan. As for the other few large battleships, Roland didn't even consider building them in Donglan. He directly sent them to the Undead Empire, the Shiloh Empire, to build them. From a blueprint to a real product, countless processes were required. Materials, craftsmanship, manpower, and many other aspects needed to be tackled. Due to the fact that they had the completed battleships, skilled workers, designers, equipment, Roland had obtained an entire industrial chain from the Ottoman Empire. He was able to directly digest this top-notch technology. It was also because of this that the Donglan Empire was still the only country in the world that possessed mature floating battleship technology. Even if Donglan sold a portion of the technology, it would still take several years for the other countries' floating battleships to reach combat strength. Renee had always treated this as her trump card, and she was vaguely proud of it. The White Wolf Knight, whose entire crew is silver-ranked, is rampaging through the human world? Our Aurora Knight is made up of gold-ranked soldiers. The Ottoman Empire's alchemy, smithing, and metallurgy are known throughout the world, but they are still unable to overcome the technology of floating battleships. It seems that the Ottoman Empire is nothing. But now, the Death Fleet had shattered her confidence. Just the potential of this industry, the vast territory, the rich resources, and the huge population was enough to easily crush Donglan. Once the two countries go to war, as the leader of a country, such assumptions would never be unnecessary. After all, in the interactions between countries, there were only absolute benefits and no absolute friends. There were too many cases of yesterday's allies becoming today's mortal enemies. For some reason, She recalled the time when she asked Roland why he insisted on rebuilding the industrial system when the country was still troubled by the problems of the people's livelihood. Roland's answer was then, "It's not that I'm a war maniac and the entire country is preparing for war. It's just that war is unavoidable." What? You're saying that even if we don't have a complete industrial system, we only need the Borealis to win the war? You're underestimating those big countries. Perhaps their single warship strength isn't enough to deal with our advanced warships, but they only have 10 warships while we only have one. They're not afraid of damage. They can just rebuild again. It doesn't matter if their soldiers die. They can just recruit more. What about us? We only have so little assets. Without an industrial system, it means that we lack the ability to produce blood. Without a complete industrial system, we won't be able to deal with a prolonged war. Right now, the Donlon Principality is actually on top of a volcano. It looks beautiful, but it's actually being roasted on top of a volcano. Big countries can lose countless times, but they can afford to lose. As for us, if we take one wrong step, we will never be able to climb out of the abyss. I don't want to gamble with my country. At this moment, facing the harsh reality and recalling Roland's seemingly meaningful words, Renee finally saw the difference between Donglon and the big countries in the continent. At least for now, there was no comparison at all. And this is only a mega empire. Renee wasn't an idiot. The moment she discovered the difference, she adjusted her entire strategy. Then, she discovered Roland's true intention of integrating the entire Northlands. The Mist Alliance? Indeed, just Donglon alone wouldn't be enough. But if Sluir and the other Northlands countries were included, the situation would be different. Roland had always been integrating the Northlands countries economically, politically, and commercially. Actually, he had long since prepared for this. Big Brother Roland probably isn't thinking about just that. What else does he intend to do? If it's the Mist Alliance, then the Casmi Dukedom, which is a vassal of San Antonio, will be too difficult to deal with. And in order to pull out this nail and make San Antonio stop from invading the Northlands, he'll need the support of the other mega empires. No wonder Big Brother Roland not only invited the major countries to the military parade and celebration, he even gave them so many benefits in terms of technology exchange. Right, there's also the envoys from the major countries. Big Brother Roland has always been too lazy to deal with things. He even personally read the letters. The matter of the Northlands dwarves and elves is obviously quite difficult to deal with, but he actually took the initiative to deal with it. There's also the recent diplomatic relations with the Northlands countries. Even though the Mist Alliance's proposal to abolish all tariffs and allow citizens to freely travel to and from the Northlands countries wasn't interested, he actually insisted on negotiating. Also, he's always sending letters to Big Sister Glena. Then, the two countries made a joint political declaration. Although the matter itself isn't that important, it seems to show that they're on the same side. And that matter, just how many things has he done in secret? Roland didn't hide his own actions towards his companions. But now that she was able to understand Roland's strategic plans on her own, Renee was one step closer to becoming a mature leader. Now that she had a correct understanding of Roland and Donglon's position in the world, as well as their strategic plans, she knew what she needed to do. I originally intended to just watch the show and let the Ottoman Empire and the Sea Tribe both suffer heavy losses before taking advantage of the situation. But now, it seems that while this might be fine for me as an individual, it's far too petty for me as a representative of an entire country. What we need now is to prove our strength to the world in a dignified manner, as well as obtain as much support as we can. This will make the Ottoman Empire owe us even more favors and repay us even more in the future. In that case, since the battle has reached a stalemate, it's time for us to break this stalemate and perform on the stage. How could adding icing on the cake compare to providing timely assistance? Fence-sitters would always be annoying. Since she had already made up her mind, what was there to hesitate about? Aurora Knight Squadron, Silver Cross Squadron, move out. Borealis, deploy new weapons. Chapter 363. The 4 Elemental Swordcasters? They're just some low-quality magic swordsmen who rely on their equipment. It's impossible to mass-produce mages that require talent. Even if they rely on their equipment to learn magic, how can they possibly reach that level with their limited talent? How can they possibly understand the true meaning of magic when even their mana source has to rely on their equipment? They're nothing more than rookies who will never be able to advance in power level. Even after spending so many resources, can't we just find a few young mages with outstanding talent and focus on nurturing them? It'll be worth it to produce an archmage. After the 4 elemental swordcasters astonishingly revealed themselves in Red Maple City, praise wasn't the only thing waiting for them. Weaknesses such as poor mana endurance, lack of high-level spells, and difficulty in advancing in power level were all pointed out by others. While the major countries were reassured by this, it also stopped them from trying to introduce this new job class. The major countries were quite interested in magical engineering's creations, but this new job class was unexpectedly given the cold shoulder. Most people were skeptical of this new job class. However, if even the archmages of the Cloud Tower had the same opinion, then it was quite obvious that there was a problem. After all, the Cloud Tower's archmages had the highest authority among mages. Indeed, although this new job class would allow ordinary people to control mana, it would be quite difficult for them to advance further as they lacked magic perception and elemental attraction talents. Not to mention, even 10 low-level rookies wouldn't be able to defeat a single high-level mage. It was only natural that a job class with no prospects for development would be doubted. Perhaps Brother Roland was thinking about the strategic importance of the spellcasters' gathering. Even Renee, who worshipped Roland the most, could only defend herself in such a manner. Talent? Is it edible? Roland responded to the doubtful gazes. He indeed had the right to be proud of himself. As a student who broke the record for failing magic classes, and as a magical idiot who had been denied the path of being a mage by several dozen teachers, he managed to become an archmage of 2 truths of truth one step at a time. It was quite convincing for him to say that talent was useless. However, exceptions were incredibly difficult to replicate. Even Roland had to admit that it was almost a miracle that he was able to reach his current level. Would there be another Roland among the several hundred 4 elemental swordcasters? The answer was obviously no. Actually, only a single-digit number of 4 elemental swordcasters had managed to advance to silver in the past year or so. The fact that those who advanced to silver in power level would always have natural talent, as mages, made most supporters feel discouraged. East Mist, with its limited resources, had an internal discussion on whether or not to continue expanding the 4 elemental swordcasters as planned. After all, East Mist wasn't rich yet. It wasn't like a large empire that had money but nowhere to spend it. Investing in a long-term project with no foreseeable future would be quite extravagant. Faced with so many doubts, Dongwon wasn't rich at all. It would be far too wasteful to invest in a long-term with no future. Elemental swordcasters would swordcasters. Swordcasters. Swordcasters are far too elemental swordcasters. Is no swordcasters purely and only power classes work. Gods. That. Power level combat is. Through. War. That. On. War is. On. Power. Is. In combat is. S. That's because war was the best way to test one's abilities. Being able to obtain outstanding combat results on the battlefield would naturally be able to stop all criticism. The Borealis engines were fully activated. The gigantic beasts hiding in the clouds began to awaken. Searchlights illuminated the sky, and the next instant, the Borealis hatch opened. The Aurora Knights rode the light of the Aurora as they tore through the sky, while several hundred swordcasters descended from the sky. Only when they could see the ground clearly did they activate the light on their backs. Bright orange flames lit up the sky as streaks of light tore through the sky and flew towards their chosen targets. These 4 elemental swordcasters didn't descend by themselves. They were all carrying heavy backpacks. Ordinary flying spells were no longer able to carry them. Unlike the slow and short flying spells of the past, These mobile backpacks that spat out magical flames were both fast and powerful. But if an ordinary person were to use these backpacks, they would be no different from an unlucky gnome riding on a goblin rocket. They would have to use their lives to think about how to get back down. However, only the 4 elemental swordcasters who had gone through magical control training were able to precisely control the intensity of the flames, control the wind, and control their own direction. And in order to better control their backpacks, they were currently inserting their magic swords into the backpack's control centers to take their place in command. The first team will be on the surface and clear out the shoals of fish harassing the airship. The second team will be underwater to snipe down high-threat targets. The third team will patrol in the sky. I'll leave backup and bombing missions to all of you. After this order was given, each team tore open their large backpacks, revealing all the equipment they had prepared beforehand. The first team was a small, single-person speedboat called Dolphin No. 1. The metal hull of the speedboat only had a place to stand and an engine. The pilot had to stand on the speedboat that was less than 2 meters long, but he had to use chains to tie himself to the speedboat. Otherwise, he might be thrown off at any moment. The powerful engine allowed the speedboat to travel at high speeds on the water. It was even faster than the flying fish. The fourth team swam around the airship, choosing smaller targets to kill. The weapons they were equipped with were all insanely heavy firepower. Dolphin No. 1's firepower platform was actually equipped with a revolving machine gun. The 4 elemental swordcasters and magic archers needed to insert their magic swords into the speedboat's control center, and then enchant the bullets with armor-piercing, acceleration, explosion, and other support abilities. Finally, all they needed to do was pull the trigger on the target. At this moment, the speedboat and heavy firepower had both become extensions of the swordcasters. This new job class that had been deemed to have no future at all showed off its own unique combat style. 3 speedboats whizzed past the sea giant like a raging storm. The roaring cannons pierced hundreds of holes in the sea giant's body, and the powerful golden giant collapsed just like that. The second team's underwater crew had breathing tanks and diving equipment. The Sea Otter prototype, a special backpack that could be used in both water and air, would convert fire magic into water magic once it entered the water, making it even more agile than the Murlocs underwater. The special harpoon guns they were equipped with were only backup weapons. In the water, even a temporary icicle would be more than enough to kill the unarmored sea tribe. The second team's goal was to snipe the mages that were hidden underwater, eliminating any possible threat to the airship. Impossible. The Sea Tribe members were astonished to discover that there were actually existences that were faster and more agile than they were underwater. Archmage Naga, who had been preparing to cast a spell, was instantly pierced through by a harpoon. Even though she had reached the frightening peak of legend rank, there was no such thing as an absolutely safe place on the battlefield. Naga, who believed herself to be absolutely safe, actually didn't have any defenses at all. She was pierced through without any resistance, and this allowed the second team to be the first to receive their spoils of war. The third team was not equipped with any powerful weapons, but in fact, they had the largest number of people. They were all carrying oil barrels filled with explosives. All right, then, this was a simple remote-controlled deep water bomb. Team 2's underwater operators would provide their teammates with coordinates, call for firepower support, and provide the most suitable time to explode. Every time an oil barrel dived into the water and exploded, there would be a bunch of sea folks' corpses on the surface of the water. Even if the sea folk were only knocked unconscious, it would still be the same as a death sentence if they appeared unconscious on the surface of the water. Happy frying fish, this is a good harvest. A 7, I'm going to the next target. Over. After notifying his underwater companions, the bombers floated back into the air and went to retrieve a depth charge from the Borealis. However, what they had to do was not just simple airstrike missions. They had to protect their comrades and provide logistical energy sources. The 4 elemental swordcasters and magic archers' excellent performance even astonished the gold-ranked Aurora Knight. Compared to the 4 elemental swordcasters and magic archers, the 4 elemental swordcasters and magic archers were only bronze-ranked on average. However, Their combat results far surpassed the gold-ranked Frigidmaw Knight. The Aurora Knight was indeed a powerful troop type that was highly suited for fighting on the surface of the water. They were capable of freezing the surface of ice and running on water. However, their attacking methods were still quite traditional. No matter if it was ice magic or physical attacks, the sea folk would be able to defend against them. Although the sea folk would still be completely suppressed, as long as the sea folk escaped deep into the ocean, the 4 elemental swordcasters wouldn't be able to chase after them. How could it be as simple and crude as a single deep water bomb? And at this moment, the 4 elemental swordcasters' advantage was fully displayed. They were able to control their own equipment as if they were using their limbs. They were able to choose equipment that suited them to the battlefield. The 4 elemental swordcasters were equipped with equipment that allowed them to fight on the surface of the water and underwater. They were even more suited to the battlefield than the sea folk. Indeed, the 4 elemental swordcasters were a job class that greatly relied on external items. However, was it really impossible to rely on external items? There was a certain civilization that relied on external items to reach the peak of the world. They invented external items that were capable of single-handedly destroying planets and entire worlds. High-level magic that couldn't increase one's magic power level? Would the gunmen in that world be able to increase their own power levels, increase the number of bullets, or make their guns spit fire? But actually, an ordinary warrior who had only completed basic training would be completely incomparable to an elite warrior who had experienced hundreds of battles. Just the ability to use weapons and piloting skills alone would be more than enough for the 4 elemental swordcasters to pursue. Weak? Lacking mobility? Perhaps it would be enough to equip them with mobile armor and iron horses. If they felt that their attack range or firepower wasn't enough, they could simply equip them with enhanced equipment. Insufficient magic power? Wouldn't it be enough to bring more? Who said that you could only bring one power source? Just look at those speedboat pilots. Just look at how they only brought 10 full Olivia's magic boxes and 3 magic swords. It's difficult to advance in power level by relying on external items. In that case, it would be enough to increase the level of an external item. This would actually be much easier than raising a high-level mage, and it could even be mass-produced. Are dwarven rifles and dwarven sniper cannons on the same level? The power of cannons combined with engineering will be increased by more than 10 times. Can a small tank even compare to a Roland Titan? Besides, I don't believe that it's impossible for the 4 elemental swordcasters to advance in power level. It's just that they've chosen the wrong direction to advance in power level. In the conference room where everyone was arguing, Roland personally showed off his newly invented sword seals and various magical sword techniques. This was a job class that focused on technique over power. Since his magic power source was external, then perhaps researching new and powerful sword seals and creating new magical sword techniques was the correct direction for him to advance in power level. Swordcasters, they're just people who use swords. Don't be bound by the past. Why must you view them as mages? Take a look at the true usage of the 4 elemental swordcasters. The reason why they're called humans is because only humans in this world know how to use tools. This is also the foundational reason why they're able to advance in power level. All right, I misspoke. Elves, beastmen, and dwarves are all fine, so please get off my back. Harloise, I've been feeling rather anemic recently. The 4 elemental swordcasters were magic users that originated from the field of magical engineering. They were born to be the best companions. They were the children of war, as well as the favorites of the new generation. As magical engineering continued to develop, they would only become stronger. And as long as there were enough foundational members, there would always be geniuses among them. Perhaps an ordinary mage would only have a 10% chance of advancing in power level, while the 4 elemental swordcasters would only have a 30% chance of advancing. However, after lowering the requirements for mages, it would be possible to produce more than 100 times the number of 4 elemental swordcasters. As long as there was enough time and enough foundational members, there would naturally be a day when there would be results. Of course, this power came with a price. Donlon already had more than 5,004 elemental swordcasters, but they only brought 200 with them. It wasn't that Renee felt that she had too many people, but rather that she only had enough equipment for 200 people. That was the only number that could be used on the battlefield. In order to further expand the power of this troop class with limitless potential, not only would they need resources and money, they would also need a country's industrial and educational power. This wasn't a problem that could be solved in a short period of time. Creating a single piece of engineering equipment only required engineers. Experts would be needed from the very beginning to design the equipment. The equipment's materials would need the support of the smithing and metallurgy industries. Enchanting and inscription arrays would need archmages skilled in enchanting. Alchemists would need to complete the mana transfer and energy circulation. Any single piece of equipment would require the support of several industries, and at least 10 people would need to work together. And if they wanted to create an assembly line for mass production, then the requirements for industrial standards would be even higher. Renee was able to understand Roland's strategy even better than the gold-ranked swordcasters when she saw the battle situation before her. These swordcasters, who weren't even bronze-ranked, had combat results that far surpassed the gold-ranked knight swordcasters. It seemed that from the very start, Roland had already seen a completely different generation from the current battlefield. Perhaps in future battles, ordinary melee weapon users would be abandoned. Magical swordcasters with special magical swords would replace the most basic warrior job class. The barrier to becoming an elemental user would become incredibly low, and mages would no longer be able to become gods. Magical engineering would replace their status as the kings of the battlefield. At that time, perhaps countries wouldn't be fighting over territory anymore. Instead, they would be fighting over various natural resources. Countries wouldn't be fighting over how many powerful individuals they had. Instead, they would be fighting over technology and craftsmanship. War would no longer be fought over by top-level combat strength. Naturally powerful dragons and giants would no longer be able to stand above everyone else. Trained mortals would become the main characters of this generation. Master craftsmen and engineers would replace the status of forbidden spell mages. Is this an invention that will change the world? Rain recalled the judgment I made when I first saw Olivia's magic box. Why did I decide to suppress all opposition with such an abnormally autocratic attitude? Why did I invest so much resources and manpower into this Olivia's magic box? Olivia's magic box was maliciously referred to as Olivia's bottomless pit. Perhaps I had anticipated this day from the very start. In fact, I was doing everything in my power to push forward these changes. Actually, Roland could see it quite clearly. Every industrial revolution was an opportunity for all countries to reshuffle their power. Being one step too slow would mean being one step too slow. There is no need to explain the consequences of falling behind. At the very least, we're now in the lead. And this lead will become our future resources and bargaining chips. That's right, Roland and his team were doubtlessly at the top of the world in this regard. Now that they had displayed outstanding combat strength here, Donlon would have even more political, military, and economic chips to play with. With a suitable platform to display their products, they would finally be able to sell their products for a high price. If I could see the situation of the future, Rain would be clenching her fists tightly. She could faintly see the possibility of her homeland becoming a mega-powerful country. Perhaps this holy war was also an opportunity for her people who had suffered far too much pain and suffering. We shall finally stand at the top of the world. Chapter 364. By the way, Roland, why haven't you been drawing the lottery recently? After becoming Roland's bound equipment, Harloise also received some benefits. She was quite curious about the system hidden within Roland's body. That system's ability to distort cause and effect was inconceivable. From a certain standpoint, as long as it was used well, it would be ridiculously powerful. I've drawn the lottery, and I've failed once. Then why haven't I heard you mention it before? Harloise was quite astonished. With her understanding of Roland, if there were any benefits, he probably wouldn't hide it. Since he didn't brag about his good luck, then the results? Yep, there's no need to talk about the results. I've drawn 5 blue for purple and 1 orange out of 10 consecutive draws. Not bad. Why haven't I heard you mention it before? Recently, Harloise was also able to understand Roland's messy terminology. Blue meant excellent grade, purple meant epic grade, and orange meant legendary grade. 6 out of 10 draws would be epic grade or higher, which should be quite good. Let's not talk about the 5 times excellent quality draws. Although they aren't top-tier items, at least they're passable and will be of some help. Then the epic quality should be even better. Yep, I was so happy when I drew the first one. It was Kratos' hand-to-hand combat manual, part 1. Kratos? Who's that? A vicious character who killed demons and Dragon Slayer. If I have to make an analogy, it's probably something like an ancient sword saint. Then aren't you happy? I flipped through it, and it's indeed that person. He killed an ancient god of war, single-handedly killed a 9-headed dragon, and fought against a giant stone statue monster. The first volume has his heroic deeds, and he swept through everything in his path. He's practically a god. I did some research, and there really was such a vicious person in the ancient era. Then why aren't you happy? The first volume is super thick, and it can be used as a brick. However, it only has heroic deeds, so I can only read it as a game guide. I mean a night novel. How could I be happy? It just so happens that the last page of the first volume says that the second volume contains the forging recipe for his unique weapon, and the second volume contains his martial skills and battle experience. I get it. The first volume is useless, but the other volumes are useful. After that, you didn't get any other volumes. No wonder you're so depressed. No, I got the middle volume next time. It did contain the manufacturing method of the ancient artifact called the Sword of Chaos. What? Let me see. After hesitating for a moment, Roland handed him a thin booklet. That's all. If it's an ancient god artifact from the materials used to make it, to the forging, to the enchantment, just the information alone is enough to fill a library. There was no need to say anything else. She opened the booklet and revealed an embarrassed expression. The words written on it were very simple. First, find 2 sturdy chains and tie them to 2 divine-level one-handed swords. Swing them a little. If the swords don't fly out, that's good enough. This ancient sword saint was truly an honest person. Yeah, he was too honest. Flip to the back. He even wrote how to obtain divine-level one-handed swords. Kitten flipped through the booklet and became even more embarrassed. Find a god and kill him. Steal his weapon, and you'll obtain a divine-level one-handed sword. If you kill a few more gods, you'll definitely obtain divine-level one-handed swords. If your hands are too unlucky, you can just become a spy and wash your hands. However, this method has some limitations. For example, last time I found a stallion mane god and finally killed him with great difficulty. In return, I obtained a top-level divine-level two-handed sword. Unfortunately, I didn't learn the two-handed sword specialization, so I couldn't equip it. Tui, this drop is just too ridiculous. It's even bound to me, so I can't use it even if I wanted to. Haha, you're truly an honest person. Harloise forced herself to laugh twice in order to comfort Roland, who was becoming more and more annoyed. Good luck. Who knows, you might even get the second volume in the future. At the very least, the martial arts techniques in the second volume should be useful. Now that you mention it, I really did get the book Kratos' hand-to-hand combat manual again. Harloise looked at Roland sympathetically. Even though he tried his best to make it sound like he was in high spirits, judging from Roland's past luck, there was likely a problem with this. Is it that martial arts techniques can't be learned, or something else? No, although I got the book Kratos' hand-to-hand combat manual, this time it's Kratos' hand-to-hand combat manual continuation. Last time, we didn't finish talking about my heroic deeds. Let's continue this time. I read for 2 hours and watched as the Spartan talked about how he fought against his semi-god brothers, how he provoked the Titans, and how he was hunted down by the Earth Mother Goddess. As expected of a heroic character with barbarian bloodline, he's really good at bragging. If what he said was true, then wouldn't he have defeated all the gods? The world would have been destroyed. How pitiful. Of the 4 myth-ranked items, 3 were like this. What's the 4th item? Huh, This time, it's Kratos' hand-to-hand combat manual continuation. I know that you didn't really believe me last time, so I'm going to tell you again. Everything that happened back then had witnesses and material evidence. Listen to me, that Titan was really huge, even bigger than a mountain, and that nine-headed dragon was really huge, even bigger than a ship. This time, I read it for 2 days and deeply understood the importance of universal language education in the barbarian tribes. Forget about the typos. He actually didn't use any punctuation. Do you know how frightening it is for someone with OCD to constantly break sentences? I read it for 2 days and spent half a month trying to fix the punctuation. You really finished reading it? After all, he was a super powerful individual from ancient times. Perhaps he had some absolute secrets. But in the end, stop scowling. It's a myth-ranked item. It should be something good. Is it a god equipment? Huh. In a way, it really is. It's Kratos' full set of armor. It's the real thing. Didn't you become rich? Wait a moment. You said that Kratos was born a barbarian. Yep. No matter if it's ancient times or now, barbarians always go into battle naked. As expected of Kratos, he's one of the better ones. He's wearing a set of armor, and it's rated as a legendary ranked equipment by the system. You mean that? Yep. A shit yellow strawberry panty, and it's the original flavor. Do you want it? I'll give it to you for free. Disgusting. Hurry and throw it away. You're actually carrying such a disgusting thing around with you. I can't do anything about it. It's the same as that ancient double-edged sword. This thing is actually bound to me. I can't throw it away even if I want to. Come, try it on. Amidst the chaos, Roland confirmed that even Harloise was unable to equip this soul-bound, glowing panty. He could only helplessly take out a large number of straps and tie it up before tossing it into his personal dimensional pocket. This is such a trap. At the very least, those elite-ranked ones are useful. Yep, elite-ranked ones are a special type of card. Every single one of them has a rune on it. As long as I gather all of the Sanyang Kaitai cards, I'll be able to obtain a god-ranked equipment that Kratos once used. I've asked the system this time, and it said that it's not a scam and that it's definitely a good item. You have 5 of them? Didn't that mean you got them? Sanyang Kaitai only has 4 characters, right? Yep, although I got to sheep characters, I did get those 4 characters, but I didn't get an exclamation mark. It's just that scammer actually wanted Sanyang Kaitai. Not a single one of the 5 runes can't be missing. Even the punctuation marks count. Actually, you can always draw more. One day you'll get it. Haha, what do you think 418's ridiculous idea of selling and drawing came from? After that, I drew, comma, colon, and there were even ellipses and question marks. System, are you kidding me? Sanyang Kaitai, why didn't I get those damned exclamation marks? I can understand how you feel, but please relax. That's just how drawing a lottery is. There'll always be people who lose and people who win. I've never won before. Relax. I already have a way to soothe my mood. Whenever I'm frustrated, I'll feel better if someone else shares my pain. I've already communicated with the justice point system. If you want to obtain my treasures, fine, go ahead and draw. 418 is only the beginning. There's still 688, 1088 waiting for you. Our goal is to draw until you shout that chopping off your hand is useless until you actually chop off your hand. You should just chop off your hand first. Chapter 365. The Bardi Empire's capital was probably the city with the longest history out of all the mega empires out there. It was the country's origin, and even the empire was named after it. That's right, the name of the Bardi Empire's capital was Bardi. In order to distinguish it from the country's name, the Bardi people would habitually refer to their capital as the capital. Outsiders would also refer to it as the Bardi Empire's capital. The Bardi Empire's capital covered an area of nearly 1,000 square kilometers, including several dozen small and medium-sized satellite cities. There were even rivers and mountains. If someone wanted to walk from the city to the capital to meet Emperor Orlos, they would need to prepare enough food and tents to last them for half a month. The largest district in the capital wasn't the Dillo district where the royal palace was located. That district was far too heavily guarded. Orlas, who had made so many enemies, had turned that district into the #1 military district in the Bardi Empire. Not to mention, all the princes who often fought amongst themselves lived there. Anyone with even the slightest bit of political sensitivity wouldn't choose to go there. During the day, all the carriages on the wide roads would have the family emblem of a certain noble or official. If anyone stayed here for too long, a patrolling knight would come over. Even so, the rate of major crimes occurring here was still the highest in the entire Bardi Empire. As Emperor Orlas, who was too old and eager to see a truly qualified successor, remained silent about the princes infighting and killing each other, as if he was tacitly approving of it, this district became even more chaotic. Princes often had the support of gangs, major merchants, and nobles, so they wouldn't personally take action. This made assassins and spies the most common jobs here, and it was already a habit for those in this profession to kill off any witnesses. Thus, it became an unspoken rule of the Bardi Empire's capital to never enter the Dillo district, which was commonly known as the Royal Palace, after sunset. As a result, a rather strange situation occurred. During the day, the streets here would be packed with people and carriages, but at night, the streets would be completely empty. However, black-clothed individuals and cloaked individuals would still be on the roofs of various houses, and they would even greet each other. "Oh, isn't this the fourth Prince's Grand Knight Karma? Where are you going this time?" Of course, it's because Lord 13 recently recruited another Archmage. I heard that he's so powerful that he's affecting the balance of power. My boss wants me to test him out, and if he's weak, I'll directly kill him. If he's really powerful, I'll teach him the rules of our profession. What a coincidence, my mission is also the same. Let's go together. Of course, there will be plenty of rewards for completing the quest in a team. Why would you want to do it alone? Isn't that a little silly? By the way, I heard that guy has some skills. Do you have any information on him? Let's share. A black-cloaked man and a gray-cloaked man started chatting. Looking at how they agreed to go and farm bosses together, they were practically a pair of good friends. However, outsiders would probably never imagine that the black-clothed man's left eye had been blinded by the gray-cloaked man. In that battle, the gray-cloaked man had also lost his left pinky and middle fingers. Not only were they not friends, they were mortal enemies who had been fighting each other just yesterday. Let's go together. Together. Take turns on him. The two of them turned around and saw a black cloak, a red cloak, and a purple mask. It seemed like the party of 5 was about to be filled up. Tonight, they were going to fight the Instance Dungeon boss. And these members of Shinran's team, who had been fighting each other like crazy yesterday, had become companions today. Perhaps tomorrow, they would see the corpses of half of their members in the gutter, and it was likely that these temporary teammates would be the cause of half of their members' deaths. After all, every thug with a bit of fame would have a tempting bounty on them. Third-rate assassins, gangsters, bodyguards of wealthy businessmen, unruly deserters, and even hooligans and black market fighters could be seen here. You could probably see all the underworld forces that you could think of. As the Emperor's death drew closer and closer, the degree of acquiescence became more and more relaxed. In fact, even the night patrol squadron was withdrawn at night. The result was that the competition between the princes had become white-hot and obvious. They spent large amounts of money to hire thugs, regardless of their background or strength. As long as they could complete their mission and survive, they were naturally good dogs that were worth spending money on. Yes, good dogs. The people in other parts of the capital called this increasingly brutal internal conflict within the royal family dogfights. The princes stood on high platforms and tossed gold coins at the people below them to kill each other. Wasn't this the same as the dogfights that were popular in certain regions? And yet, this dogfight involved more and more people, to the point where it seemed like it was going to engulf the entire capital. There's no sign of life at all. Holy Light's healing is completely ineffective. He could die at any moment. This was secretly leaked by a certain royal physician, and on the afternoon that he received a large sum of gold coins as a reward, he was taken away by the Royal Knight Squadron and executed on the same night. The healing effect of Holy Light, in the end, was to return the victim to a normal state. That was why it was effective against external injuries and ordinary poison wounds. However, it was practically useless against reconstructing a limb after it had been severed for a period of time. That was because holy light would judge that the person was already in a normal state. So how could it change again? And for dead people like the undead who were filled with negative energy, holy light, which could return the victim to a normal state, would naturally be their mortal enemy. For the same reason, if someone died of old age due to their life force failing, their normal state would be that they were on the verge of death. They would be hanging on to their last breath with medicine. Of course, holy light would be completely useless. Blindly using holy light to activate the last of the victim's life force would only cause them to die even faster. From a certain standpoint, when holy light was no longer effective on an elderly or sick person, it would be a death notice in a different sense. Although the Bardi Royal Knights had acted quite quickly and immediately destroyed the source of this information and blocked the spread of this information, this also proved the veracity of this piece of information in a way. And so, while all the princes and princes were in a frenzy of joy and madness, the various nobles and important figures of various industries in the Bardi Empire could no longer just sit back and watch the dogs fight. After all, it was obvious that a new emperor was about to succeed to the throne. It was now time for them to place their bets and personally take the throne. The rewards of helping an emperor ascend to the throne would be enough to make any merchant bet their entire family's wealth and life. And for the nobles, this was also a huge gamble. If they won, their status and title would explosively increase, and they might even gain great power. But if they lost, actually, it wouldn't matter much to the major nobles. They would just be greatly disliked by the new emperor. However, the major nobles with large territories would actually be less likely to be hated by the new emperor. As long as they didn't make a deep grudge against the new emperor, they could just obediently scram back to their territories and hide like turtles. It would be fine for them to keep their tails between their legs in the future. When the major nobles, merchants, and even the leaders of the military and civil service all took action, although the current emperor was still alive and the country was still relatively stable on the surface, if the entire upper echelons took action as well, the internal situation would be in complete chaos. Fortunately, with Emperor Orlos's ruthless methods and prestige, the nobles still didn't dare to tear apart the layer of paper on the surface and limit the chaos to the royal palace. How is this possible? If chaos could really be controlled, then the Chaos faction would have made peace with the Order faction long ago. Although the nobles said that they couldn't affect the citizens of other places, the major merchants would use their merchant guilds to attack their competitors. This would cause the entire market to violently fluctuate. The gray factions under the control of the nobles would take action. Just a small thug would be able to cause chaos in an entire alley, and not to mention the fact that a single move by the military would cause half a city's citizens to be in a state of panic and unable to sleep. The citizens were no idiots. This was especially so when murders happened every few days, or when a noble who had been doing quite well in the past was suddenly found dead on the streets. Rumors would naturally spread like wildfire. At some unknown point in time, the news that Emperor Orlos was about to die was no longer a secret. Even though the ordinary citizens could understand why Emperor Orlos was using such a special method to find a suitable successor, how could the ordinary citizens hope for a peaceful life like this to continue, especially since they were currently in the midst of war? That's right. War was currently in the middle of a chaotic war against multiple countries. The so-called vanguard of the Holy War had already been half destroyed by the rampaging dragons. However, they still existed within the Bardi Empire's borders. It was as if the common people had forgotten about them. Meanwhile, there was good news for Night Rain City's defensive line. Due to a certain person's outrageous actions, the undead lords and their armies that were close to Davi had all been wiped out, until a new undead leader arrived or was appointed, as well as until the undead lords who hadn't participated in the allied armies had finished shirking their responsibilities. Night Rain City's defensive line would be temporarily stabilized. Once the contract heroes on the western battlefront had time to spare, they would naturally be able to reinforce the eastern battlefront. Nitrain City would enter a period of stability, and it was only during this period that the Dragon Knight Archduke Carwins dared to go about his own business. As for the final target of war, the Mage Country. That's right, they were still at war. At least on the surface, the Mage Country had used a forbidden spell to destroy one of Barty's fortresses. Dragon Knight and Archmages from both sides were still fighting on the front lines. Since there was no agreement on paper yet, it was only natural that both sides were still at war. In fact, since the Mage Country had won all the battles in the Barty Empire, many citizens who had lost their loved ones in the fortresses raised flags and asked their rulers to help them attack the Mage Country. Not only that, there were also people who used propaganda against the Mage Country to vent the citizens' anxiety and fear. This made the citizens even more hostile towards the Mage Country. As for an actual attack, even if the Mage Country didn't know the true situation, just the fact that the successor to the Mage Country's crown had yet to be decided meant that none of the major figures were willing to waste their energy on such a thankless task. And in such a precarious situation, Cher's arrival here as the Mage Country's ambassador naturally attracted a lot of attention. It wasn't enough for a capital city to only be a political center. The Queso district was the center of commerce and education. It was more than 3 times the size of the Royal Palace district. In the 30-some years since Orlas took the throne, the Queso district had become increasingly prosperous. In the past, merchants from various countries would gather there. It was also the most prosperous district in the Barty Empire. In order to avoid conflicts that would make people feel helpless, especially when a certain prince colluded with a foreign spy to murder his own brother and failed, all diplomatic embassies were moved to the business district near the Royal Palace district. When considering the current situation, Cher's arrival was indeed quite low-key. She used the cover of night to secretly enter a hotel. However, her status made it impossible for her to keep a low profile. A horse-drawn carriage with the Mage Country's emblem would travel between the business district and the Royal Palace district several times a day, and the carriage would stop at a hotel for foreign envoys to stay in. Naturally, even ordinary citizens would learn that an enemy country's ambassador had arrived. And so, the city's rotten eggs and rotten fruits were sold out. From the Barty citizens' perspective, this was quite easy to understand. They also needed a way to vent their dissatisfaction. And so, every time the horse-drawn carriage passed through the city, it would be like whack-a-mole. Some youths who weren't satisfied even chased the carriage all the way to the hotel. Although the guards at the hotel's entrance wouldn't let them in, they would simply toss some harmless rotten fruits at them. The guards, who were just as displeased with the Mage Country, would pretend that they didn't see anything. The end result was that cannons could be heard outside, and no one dared to go near the windows of the hotel. Even in such a situation, the other members of the Mage Country's envoy group were quite calm. However, Cher, as the ambassador, was quite confused. Why are you all so calm? Answer: we're used to being scammed. Roland's old subordinates were already used to being scammed. However, Cher was filled with frustration. Even though I'm just an ordinary mage working in the Barty Empire's disciplinary department, and I didn't even pass the Archmage assessment, I was mysteriously appointed as an ambassador by my superiors. I was sent to a hostile capital. I had a secret agreement, but I couldn't announce it. My temporary residence's windows were all destroyed, and it was so cold at night. Every day, the old emperor would ask me to discuss official matters with him, but I was forced to play chess with him. Not only that, the emperor's chess skills were so terrible, and he always reneged on his moves. If it weren't for the fact that the Barty Empire and the Barty Empire's relationship was such that a war might really break out, Cher would have been unable to restrain herself long ago. How could I possibly restrain myself? I've had enough. I'm done. All right then, Cher, who didn't have a good temper, was already furious. However, what she couldn't restrain the most was, even though we agreed that I'm only a puppet ambassador on the surface, and that Vice Ambassador Roland should be in charge of all the work, why did he disappear right after we left? In the end, all the work fell to me. I've already had enough trouble on my way here, and now there's so much to do. How could someone be so irresponsible? Such a familiar roar of anger, such a familiar complaint. Kolos had a sympathetic expression as she looked at Cher, who was now in a state of anxiety. It seemed that anyone who spent a lot of time with Roland would come here for several days every month. I've seen my past self. Lilith fell into deep thought as she looked at the chaos outside the window. Was the past self she mentioned referring to the royal princess who was viewed as an enemy by the Bardi Empire citizens, or the pitiful internal affairs head steward who had been constantly busy all day after her superiors gave her countless jobs in Sulphur Mountain City and had no hope for her colleagues at all? Relax, Sister Cher. Teacher will probably arrive soon. He probably won't forget such a major incident, probably. As Cher's disciple, Cohen still had to protect his teacher's honor. However, when he thought about how unreliable his teacher was, he ended up revealing his lack of confidence in his teacher. What a chaotic place. Miss Yon, His Highness Roland told me that this is an ancient empire in the mortal world. They're slow to react to new things and are arrogant. Their prejudice against the Dark Elves hasn't changed at all. According to ancient customs, the Bardi Empire will first burn down the Dark Elves in the city before investigating them. Judging from this, the Bardi Empire is basically a group of uncivilized barbarians who have no sympathy whatsoever. Eaglestorm started talking nonstop. However, Momo, who had been transferred over to help Yon due to a lack of manpower, was looking at him with anticipation. Did he expect this situation? Did he mention me? Did he say what he wanted me to do? Fine, I'll get straight to the point. If they want to enforce the law on the streets, tell them that this isn't their territory. Pretending to be law enforcers and harming others is also a serious crime. They should know what it's like for law enforcers to break the law. He even thought of that, but he didn't think of our current situation. The law faction's restless members calmed down after hearing Roland's message. However, the most troublesome one was the current ambassador of the mage country, who was about to go insane from the pressure. She had just played 3 hours of crappy chess against a lousy chess player who kept reneging on his moves. She had even been baptized by an egg storm on the way back. Her rationality was on the verge of collapsing. Now that she heard Roland's name, she immediately exploded. I've had enough. I don't want to be the ambassador anymore. I'm returning to the mortal world right now. Cohen, who still had a bit of a conscience, hesitated for a moment before finally persuading Roland. Then, Sister Shirley, you should first say goodbye to His Majesty Emperor Roland. That means that our carriage will have to pass through the city again. I don't know if they still have any ammunition. There's a shortage of fruits here every day. Right, it's almost nightfall. Those strange creatures running around on the roofs are about to come out again. It's highly likely that our carriage will be ambushed. Sister Shirley, do you intend to wear a mask as well? Actually, I still have some leftover masks from last time. Little Cohen, has anyone ever told you that you're just as annoying as your master? All right then. The ambassador had completely exploded. However, cough, cough. Eaglestorm, who is the elder here, cleared his throat and looked at Shirley with a sympathetic gaze. His Highness Roland's exact words are, if Shirley refuses to take on this responsibility, then tell her that she can forget about receiving any research funding for the next 50 years. She'll fail all her research evaluations. And there's also the daily task of cleaning toilets that her superiors must do. That's right, this is bullying. You're welcome to complain about your superiors when you return to the headquarters. Yep, just complain to Roland, who just took over as the head of the discipline department. He's your superior's superior. Damned Roland, I even thought that you were a good person. All right, this was still such a familiar roar, causing everyone present to involuntarily sink into their memories. If Roland was a god who hated divine concepts, then with his power of making others hate him, he should be a main god by now. Chapter 366. What was the difference between riding a dragon and riding a horse carriage? Perhaps some people would say that riding a dragon was cool, while riding a horse carriage was normal. Riding a dragon was fast, while riding a horse carriage was slow, or that riding a dragon required strength, while riding a horse carriage only required a certain amount of money. But if it was me, don't say such nonsense about how cool it looks. Riding a horse carriage is much more comfortable than riding a dragon. Didn't you think about what to do when there's a storm while flying in the sky? There were endless dark clouds in front of us, and Little Red and I were drenched in rain, or perhaps I should say sleet and hail. It wasn't exactly warm in the spring sky, and a low temperature caused the raindrops to freeze into tiny ice cubes that smacked against my head. I was already wearing a full set of armor. Not far away, a blue dragon soared through the clouds. Lightning-type dragons love this type of weather the most. Abundant electricity would give their entire body a comfortable massage and replenish their energy. He was even moaning like a chicken being butchered. But judging from the Dragon Knight, whose hair was already standing on end and half of his body was charred black, he was in an even worse state than I was. It seemed that there was still a huge difference between a half-blood dragon and a true dragon. Dragons were a strange type of creature that emphasized dignity. They were so prideful that they could even be called arrogant. Usually, only young dragons would be willing to become Dragon Knight's contractors. Even older dragons with some experience and history wouldn't be willing to become someone else's mount. Well, let's not even talk about the professional mount that was currently hiding back in Shiloah. He was obviously an exception among exceptions. He was the only dragon I'd seen in so many years that had such low moral integrity. I could probably add Molly to the list as well. Cough. Normal dragons would reject a Dragon Knight. This didn't matter if you had a good relationship or not. After all, no matter how good a relationship you had with a friend, if that friend wanted you to kneel down and let him ride you for several decades, the best result would probably be a fierce fight between you and him, and then they would go their separate ways. As for the night novels where a dragon could be successfully abducted by offering some roasted meat or glass, if the dragon wasn't mentally retarded, then it would probably be an excuse to hide the true plot, such as a little dragon girl or a knight G, cough cough. I think I went off topic. There was a huge difference between a real Dragon Knight and a legendary Dragon Knight. Most of the stories went something like this. Some powerful knight who was addicted to night novels would capture a small dragon and beat it to death. If he won, he would force the dragon to sign a subordinate contract or something. Dragons were a group of particularly prideful creatures. If it wasn't for the overwhelming difference in strength, they would rather die than submit. Then, a powerful individual who finally became a Dragon Knight would be shocked to discover that the dragons that they could defeat were far weaker than themselves. This mount would basically be useless. It would take so much effort to obtain a means of transportation, and the dragon's father might even hunt them down. Wouldn't it be a waste? If the Dragon Knight could wait for 300 to 500 years, the young dragon might become an adult dragon. However, if a strong person could live for 300 to 400 years, what use would an ordinary adult dragon with quasi-legendary level combat power be? My conclusion was that even though the Dragon Knight looked mighty, unless it was a main character template that inexplicably recognized a master, it was probably a synonym for chicken ribs. Looking at things now, the largest Dragon Knight squadron in the mortal plane was located in Barty, and the Knight members were all mixed-blood dragons. They were likely siblings, signed a soul contract, subordinate contract, or something like that. The Dragon Knight and Dragon Knight were more like playmates. You're saying so much just to prove that this type of treatment is normal? She's obviously tormenting you. Are you a masochist? Or is there something wrong with your head? You're hopeless. I was rendered speechless by the silly cat's sarcasm. But when I thought back to the past, I realized that this type of treatment was quite rare. Although Little Red, as an immemorial red dragon, was incredibly prideful, she was still quite nice to us old friends. Occasionally, she would take us on a flight or two at a critical moment. For example, last time when we had to rush back to Sulphur Mountain City to fight against the demons, she had made an exception and arrived just in time. This time, I was going with the Dragon Knight Archduke to the Barty capital. His steed was a blue dragon, the fastest of all dragons. It would be impossible for Irene Bela to keep up with him. And since this matter involved the dragons, Little Red, as the underground dragon queen, was also intending to come into contact with the dragon cities on the surface. And so, it was quite normal for me to ask for a ride with her. Of course, I understood dragons quite well, which was why I told her that I only needed to fly with her. As for Molly, no matter what, she was Little Red's mother. Wasn't this the same as asking her, "Is it okay if I ride your mother?" There seemed to be something wrong here. Wasn't this the same as me asking Little Red, "Is it okay if I ride you?" Cough, cough, I tossed aside all thoughts of zombies and got back to the main topic. This time, Little Red was surprisingly easy to talk to. She said, "We're good sisters, so there's no need to treat me like an outsider. Just ride on my back." Although I felt like something was wrong here, it was still quite uncomfortable to be carried around in a daze, so I happily accepted. But in the end, it's fine if you're a small dragon that can't fly high. But immemorial red dragons are clearly capable of flying in the clouds. Why do you have to endure the icy rain? You're a fire element dragon, so you should feel even more uncomfortable than I do. Stop nagging. I'm willing. You don't want to endure the rain? Sure, I still have a seat for you. Little Red opened her mouth, full of malice, revealing her sharp dragon teeth. She even spat out some dragon flames. When considering the possibility that I would accidentally be swallowed by the icy rain, I gulped and resolutely refused Little Red's suggestion. No need. I think it's better for me to sober up in the rain. You do need to sober up. Although I didn't know why she was angry, everyone around me seemed to be saying that I was in the wrong. Based on my past experience, it was indeed quite likely that I was in the wrong, so I decided to bear with it. Yep, it definitely wasn't that I was worried that she would throw me off, so I temporarily gave in. Cough. At any rate, my armor was thick and I had high ice resistance. The icy rain's damage was completely negligible. Still, my feet felt rather cold and hungry. I remember that I had filled my backpack with food when I arrived, so I took out a picnic cloth. "Roland, if you keep lighting a fire on my back to roast your feet and meat, I'll let you stay in the VIP seats in front of me." And so, I fell silent for a moment and changed my method. Roast sausages and warm wine won't do either. I'm having so much trouble traveling in the rain, and you're actually drinking wine on my back. Do you know how much I have to endure as a red dragon? Then fly higher. I didn't say such a complaint out loud. That was because, based on my many years of experience, if a woman was angry, the more she said, the more mistakes she would make. It was best to remain silent. "I'll give you half of the wine when it's warm." That's not the reason. This is fruit wine that you brewed yourself. Where did you get such good peaches? I want 2/3. All right then. Thanks to the wine, Little Red no longer suddenly flew backwards or spun around. I also didn't need to tie myself to Little Red's back anymore. And so, I took out 3 barrels of wine and started a fire to roast Little Red. There was no helping it. Actually, 1 barrel was only enough for Little Red to drink half a mouthful. After drinking wine, Little Red unexpectedly sighed and then suddenly rose up into the sky. She spread her wings and soared high into the clouds. I looked at the various shapes of the clouds around me, making it seem as if I was in a fairyland. The warm sunlight made me feel much more comfortable. Of course, the happiest part was that I finally didn't need to be drenched in the rain above the clouds. Forget it. Getting angry at you will only make me feel worse. I already knew that getting angry at someone like you would be meaningless. Hey. No matter what, I'm helping you out here. Can't you be a little more polite? Am I as unbearable as you say? Am I as infuriating as you say? Yes. Little Red's answer was resolute and decisive. Yes. The silly cat interrupted again. Yes. My system was furiously reminding me of my existence. For me, Little Red and Molly's journey together was both troublesome and an opportunity. Little Red was the Dragon Queen of the underground city. Just this identity alone determined that when Little Red appeared in front of other dragons, or even when she entered the dragons' gathering grounds above ground, it would determine whether or not the red and black dragons would be recognized by other dragons. Perhaps we were just fooling around as if we were on a field trip, but no matter what the result of this trip was, it was destined to be recorded in history. Obviously, Little Red and Molly's governing styles were completely different. Back then, even if Molly wanted to return to the surface, Little Red would at least try to reconcile with her. The exact time that these 2 powerful color dragons had been exiled to the underground world was no longer reliable. It was also unknown whether or not the dragons involved were still alive. In fact, nobody even knew the specific reason for their exile and how long they had been exiled. The only thing that could be confirmed was that these 2 types of dragons were the oldest inhabitants of the underground world. They had been exiled far earlier than the Dark Elves and Lorsi. Dragons were capable of inheriting the knowledge of their ancestors while they were still in their eggs. That was why red and black dragons were no good birds. I secretly glanced at Little Red. Since they had been exiled, it was likely that they had caused quite a bit of trouble back in the day. But in my opinion, no law or punishment should harm their descendants. Now that the red and black dragons were no longer around, it was reasonable for them to want to return to the surface. Dragons wouldn't be dragons if they were reasonable. That was what Little Red said when I mentioned this. Ignoring the fact that her declaration seemed to have hit the nail on the head, I was actually rendered speechless because her words were far too reasonable. She even faintly felt proud of herself. The more ancient a species was, the more they liked to emphasize their past glory. They would even place the teachings of their ancestors on a pedestal. It wasn't only humans and elves who were stubborn enough to say the teachings of our ancestors can't be changed. Since there are past customs and traditions, and since everyone lived like this in the past, why should we change them? It was obvious that our trip here wouldn't go smoothly. But if we didn't try, Little Red wouldn't be satisfied, and neither would I be satisfied. After all, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Was this a good time? Of course it was a good time. One of the dragon's 3 main residences was under threat. Their mortal enemy, the Titan giants, was about to revive, and the holy war was upon them. This holy war would definitely drag the dragons, who had always maintained their aloof attitude, into the fray. The entire species was in danger. If we didn't take advantage of the situation, if we didn't help them in their hour of need, wouldn't we be wasting such a rare opportunity? In times of danger, humans would naturally have lower limits. It was the same for dragons. Not to mention, the 2 color dragons would be able to assist other dragons, which would be a powerful bargaining chip. Our current situation would be the same as tying aid to political decisions. Although this would be rather despicable, it would always be unscrupulous to use any means necessary in battles between countries and species. Since this was the best option with the highest chance of success, why wouldn't we use it? As long as we obtained the dragon's approval, or even just tacit approval, the underground's black and red dragons would be able to openly appear in the mortal plane skies on a large scale. This would also greatly increase our combat strength. And once we accomplished something that no Dragon Queen or Dragon King had ever accomplished, Little Red's status would become even more stable. In fact, there would even be other immemorial dragons willing to work for her in order to return to the surface. Of course, when considering the 2 dragons' usual habits, I was also hesitant about whether or not I was opening the door to thieves. But when I thought about how there would be no future if they couldn't overcome this current calamity, I felt that it was worth a try. After all, with Dragon Queen Little Red watching over them, there wouldn't be any major trouble for the time being. When I thought about trouble, I felt quite displeased as I glanced at Molly, who was slowly flying in the sky. Recently, she no longer had any expectations or pursuits. She seemed to be quite relaxed every day. She really knows how to cause trouble. The moment Molly returned to the surface, she perfectly demonstrated just how evil an immemorial red dragon could be. She attacked villages, kidnapped for ransom, became a mercenary, and even robbed other dragons. She was basically the perfect villain. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to enter the calamity rankings so quickly. And her status as a former Dragon Queen caused the surface residents' impression of the underground dragons to rapidly decrease. As expected, she's just like the records say. Fortunately, most black and red dragons are still in the underground. Every time Little Red heard such words, she would get so angry that she would grit her teeth. This type of attitude naturally made this trip even more difficult. Let's do our best and leave it to fate. When I evaluated the success rate of this trip and felt that it was less than 30%, Little Red was quite optimistic. That's the only way. Why do I feel like the biggest trouble on this trip isn't even this? It feels like there's some other trouble waiting for me. Did I forget something? Or did I not notice something? There's so much that you didn't notice. All right then, I seem to have accidentally touched on something and started complaining again. Finally, we stopped complaining. Our speed was much faster than before, but it would still take quite a while for us to catch up to Howland and his blue dragon mount. Actually, if it wasn't for the fact that Howlent was waiting for us, his speed would likely have doubled. That little fellow flies so quickly. By the way, that little fellow is at least 200 years old. If he's a little fellow, then what am I? A little fellow as well? Can't we go any faster? This is about the highest speed we can go. If you think it's too slow, you can fly by yourself. Were blue dragons really that fast? Actually, it was little Red and Molly who were too slow. Blue dragons were only about 30% faster than other dragons, and this was mainly due to their ability to control the wind. Halen's dragon had just reached adulthood, so he was at the peak of his speed. Naturally, he was much faster than us. Were immemorial dragons supposed to fly faster than ordinary adult dragons? That was what most people thought as well. However, they didn't think too much about it. Large dragons didn't necessarily mean that they could run fast. Super dragons that were 7 or 8 times the size of adult dragons would also use up 7 or 8 times the energy consumption of young dragons. Since they were called immemorial dragons, most of them were over 1,000 years old. They spent most of their time sleeping or researching magic. Even hunting was done by their subordinates. Their stamina was actually much weaker than when they were younger. Plus, their enormous bodies put pressure on their internal organs. Even the beat of their wings seemed rather sluggish. Of course, since dragons were a species that naturally excelled in both physical and magic, most dragons would choose to use magic and their natural talents to increase their speed in battle. That was why no powerful dragon would be slow on the battlefield for a short period of time. However, if they were traveling from a distance, using their natural talents to increase their speed would be far too extravagant. As a result, adult and adult dragons were the fastest. Dragons' bodies would basically stop growing after reaching the later stages of the immemorial dragon generation. At their level, magic and natural talents were far more important than physical combat. Even the stupidest white dragon would be a top-level mage in a certain magic element. Their unique draconic spellcasting and special incantations would be even more powerful. According to what I knew, Little Red was one of the few immemorial dragons who persisted in daily training, which was why she was incredibly strong in melee combat. She was also quite skilled in truth magic, fire magic, and spatial magic. After inheriting the position of Dragon Queen, she was also able to read the secret draconic techniques of Dragon City. Plus, she also trained hard compared to other dragons, so her power level had increased significantly. In fact, she was already at the threshold of advancing to the next power level. This was obviously a great thing for our upcoming mission. After all, although we had been invited here to help, it was likely that fighting would be unavoidable when I thought about the extra tasks we had to complete and how arrogant the lizards were. I hope that this mission will be successful, although I keep feeling like we're going to run into some major trouble. My premonitions have always been very accurate. For example, I told you that I should bring an umbrella when I left home, but you told me that you didn't need it. Look, isn't it raining? Judging from the weather, there might even be a typhoon. Shut up, you jinx. All right, looking at the tornado not far away, I obediently shut up. Chapter 367. Even flying at high altitudes wasn't without danger. The airspace of an ordinary small country was basically defenseless against a large country's aerial night squadron. However, casually entering a large country's airspace would be the equivalent of provoking that country's air defense and aerial night squadron. However, the most dangerous thing to do was to accidentally enter the Magus Tower's attack range. Even giant dragons could easily fall if they encountered a Magus Tower that was well prepared. A high-quality mage tower would be able to amplify a mage's magic power by 10 times over. A large-scale high-circle spell would be able to transform into a small forbidden spell after several layers of amplification. There were many dragons that had been defeated by mages. This was also why dragons would maintain a basic level of respect for mages. According to what I knew, all the major prefectures in the Bardi Kingdom had such an air defense zone. In fact, even the slightly stronger domain lords would hire archmages to create such an air defense zone. Of course, they weren't necessarily defending against external enemies. After all, The major domain lords of mega-empires were no less wealthy than a small country's national treasury. Many of them would be able to afford an aerial night squadron. Just like how divine authority and royal authority would forever fight, royal authority and domain lords' autonomy would forever be in conflict. And if the royal authority was in an extremely weak position, domain lords would often attack each other and steal each other's territory and citizens. Perhaps the reason they would use would be something like, "Your son didn't invite me to his birthday celebration," or "Your wife seduced my second brother-in-law," or something along those lines. But if the royal authority lost its authority, these ridiculous reasons would be more than enough. If the royal authority was weak, internal strife would be unavoidable. And if a domain lord who controlled the majority of the country's power obtained victory, a new royal authority would be born. And since the new royal authority had relied on its own power to ascend to the throne, it was only natural that the royal authority would be centralized. Naturally, the royal authority would enter a period of prosperity. However, there was no such thing as a dynasty that wouldn't fall. It was even more impossible for there to be a generation of wise rulers. As long as the feudal system and bloodline system continued, it would only be a matter of time before the new ruler was replaced. Obviously, this was an unpleasant cycle. However, this kind of social structure allowed for endless conflicts and annexation. While ordinary people were threatened by the flames of war, one couldn't deny its contribution to the progress of society. At the very least, this was a natural blood-changing mechanism. Foolish or perverse rulers would eventually fall. In consideration of future development, I had done some research on these political systems. However, I didn't intend to come up with a declaration to liberate the serfs or punish the local tyrants and distribute their land, or anything like that. In fact, I didn't even intend to carry out deep social reforms outside of the law. That was because the current land was vast, productivity was low, and wild magical beasts were far too powerful. This type of system, where a domain lord was completely responsible for the citizens within his territory, seemed backward, but it was actually the most suitable for the current social situation. Serve the world as a whole. Everyone should listen to the king. Since you belong to the royal family, you should go find a royal family to protect you. Domain lords had the right to own their territory, their citizens, and their wealth. This was also what allowed them to build up their military strength and protect their land. Didn't the very first knight's spirit originate from the most basic loyalty to the domain lord and the protection of their territory? Nobility came from the ordinary. Protecting one's own belongings was understandable. In this generation, there was already a certain basic principle. Taking half a step forward would be considered a genius, while taking one step forward would be considered an idiot who would be burned at the stake. If there really was a transmigrator who came from another world and created a completely centralized country with a prefectural system, replacing the feudal lords with local officials, what awaited him wouldn't be a bountiful harvest, but the collapse of the entire country. Perhaps it would take several years for a decree from the central government to reach a remote region. Who knew what would happen when the decree reached the grassroots level? Centralization of power would result in an overpopulation. This was a problem that couldn't be solved in the current generation. Just the possibility of plagues, natural disasters, and famines caused by too many people living together was already unsolvable. Just thinking about it for a moment would make it obvious that doing such a thing would be suicidal. This was the result of doing bad things with good intentions. Of course, it would still be possible to try this in a tiny country. If technology developed to a certain degree and gradually became more urbanized and modernized, then medical, communication, transportation, agriculture, and industry would rise several levels along with the Industrial Revolution. Then even if I didn't do anything, the times would naturally change. Yep, I admit that I was tempted by this idea. However, it would be impossible to cut off this cycle of changing royal authority in a short period of time. Of course, there are also a few exceptions, such as countries that were too small in size, religious countries that had unified divine authority and royal authority, or border countries that were constantly under the threat of foreign invasions. For their own reasons, their governments were relatively stable, which was why they had been able to survive for thousands of years. Ahem, ahem. Let's ignore the cycle of history for now. After all, it had already happened so many times, so it wouldn't be a waste of time. I didn't intend to shout slogans like everyone is created equal or all wealth belongs to everyone. Nor did I intend to create some sort of scythe and hatchet party to become the entire world's public enemy. I would do as much as I could, so I should focus on the present first. Now that the Bardi Empire's royal authority was at its peak, the domain lords naturally wouldn't attack each other. In fact, they would band together and resist the royalty's desire for centralization of power. Since centralization of power was impossible to achieve in the current situation, this was a battle where there would be no eternal victor. The battle between the two sides would continue forever until a new royalty was born. The current Bardi Empire was at the peak of its history. In fact, Orlos was even able to force the domain lords to send their eldest sons to the capital to learn. He had also achieved some results in reorganizing the domain lords' private armies. However, if he wanted all the domain lords to be obedient to him, it would take at least another 100 years. Not only that, he would also need to win every battle without any internal chaos. Unless he was an undead main character with a cheat, he definitely wouldn't be able to wait that long. Although the current Bardi Empire was nominally unified, strictly speaking, it was still divided into individual territories. Calculating a country's combat strength would usually refer to the country's royalty's subordinate armies. Royal Knight Squadrons were the equivalent of National Knight Squadrons. However, in a large-scale battle, the domain lord's private armies would likely need to be included. After all, responding to the king's summons and sending private armies to participate in a national battle was one of the domain lord's basic duties. Private armies shouldn't be underestimated. Their training and equipment would all be inherited from a domain lord's family. Special equipment and troop types would often be adapted to local conditions. There were many private armies that were even stronger than the kingdom's regular army. And since the royalty had restrictions on domain lords, the major nobles who had their private armies limited would try to use quality to obtain victory. It wasn't uncommon for private armies to have far more private armies than Royal Knight Squadrons. The number of private armies was usually limited by the nobility's rank. However, there were also militia, and other loopholes that could be exploited. Although private armies didn't seem like much, when accumulated, most countries' nobles' private armies would have combat strength several times that of the royalties. Only then would they be able to restrict the royalty. After all, in a way, the royalty of a feudal country was the strongest domain lord in that country. And this was only for ordinary domain lords. If it was a domain lord who guarded the borders, then it would be impossible for the number of troops under his command to be limited. Such a major noble would easily become a candidate for the new royalty. On the way here, I finally witnessed just how much confidence the Bardi Kingdom had. Basically, no matter where we went, there would be an aerial knight following us. There would be a griffin knight, a Pegasus knight, and even a dragon knight. There were even mages riding manticores, either in small squads or in groups of 2 or 3. Even a small country wouldn't be able to afford an aerial knight, yet this was the most basic equipment that the Bardi Kingdom's domain lords had. I even saw 2 faintly discernible towers in the clouds. When they saw the Dragon Knight Archduke's blue dragon in front of us, they didn't immediately leave. They only silently followed us until we left the Bardi Kingdom's territory. Usually, a new aerial knight would arrive at the border, and the previous aerial knight would turn around and leave. This polite, yet distant attitude wasn't only directed at outsiders like us. Not a single person even greeted the Dragon Knight Archduke on the way here. This was quite abnormal. Although the Dragon Knight Order nominally belonged to the royalty, they still had the right to travel freely in any territory. However, perhaps these aerial knight Archduke Bardi wouldn't be able to stop the Dragon Knight Archduke from doing anything, but at the very least, they expressed their attitude. This place is mine. You may come, but you must be under our surveillance. This was obviously a bit too much. It was quite different from what I had heard before. It seemed that these domain lords had new ideas now that Emperor Bardi was about to die. However, even though I hadn't arrived at the capital city yet, I could already guess what was going on. There were simply too many princes, so a civil war seemed inevitable. But once a civil war broke out, no matter who the final victor was, the royal authority would naturally be greatly reduced. It seemed that the Bardi domain lords from 40 years ago would once again be able to suppress the royal family. Perhaps the Dragon Knight Archduke Bardi's wariness wasn't only a political stance, but also a practical one. Who knows whether or not you're here to record the army's deployment in order to prepare for the upcoming war. As for us outsiders, we weren't interrogated at all. Perhaps it was because we had a guide that we were also viewed as members of the Dragon Knight Order. Our new companion also smoothly traveled together with us. New companion? Yep, didn't I just casually say something, and a tornado suddenly appeared? How could there be such a coincidence? That rampaging tornado transformed into a familiar figure in front of us, the wind elemental god Camdrin. Your Excellency Roland, I've come here specifically to find you. There's something very important that I need to discuss with you in detail. After killing off Omdaroken, Camdrin immediately fled. Left in a hurry. But now, he voluntarily appeared in front of me. It was obvious that he had something important to discuss with me. He was different from the other insignificant insects and foolish mortals in the past. However, he was obviously quite humble. These ancient existences were just that practical. If you didn't show them a combat record that proved that you were an equal existence, they wouldn't even look at you. Of course, I was quite happy to see Camdrin. After all, I was currently searching for the wind elemental god's divine item. Killing him and asking him might give me some information. But when I took a closer look, I could only helplessly give up on my backup plan. After all, Camdrin had only appeared in front of me as an incarnation. Not only would Camdrin self-destruct at the slightest provocation, it would also be quite difficult for him to drop any good equipment. It would be better to just forget about this boss that was difficult to defeat and didn't drop anything. But we were in a hurry right now, so this obviously wasn't the time to chat. So, I directly asked Camdrin to follow me. But the strange thing was that Camdrin seemed to be in a hurry to say something, so I casually asked him about it. Camdrin was delighted to hear that. Your Excellency, I'd like to talk about what you did in the Ottoman Empire. That desecration priest and anti-holy knight who expelled divine power. What? Desecration priest? Anti-holy knight? While the battle against the Titan giants was taking place in the southwest of the Bardi Empire, the Ottoman Empire's naval forces were also achieving astonishing results. Rene's 4 elemental swordcasters and the funeral fleet had achieved astonishing results. The 4 elemental swordcasters' battleships rampaged about, and the Sea Tribe's battleships that were broken up would be harvested by the 4 elemental swordcasters, who had split up into 3 teams. Actually, this battle strategy of the 4 elemental swordcasters and the funeral fleet was meant to be used in conjunction with the Borealis and its 7 super heavy airships. It was perfect to use it now. In actual combat, the problems with the Borealis battle strategy were also exposed. For example, individual combat strength was too weak, which meant that they didn't dare to fight head-on. Many problems, such as water leakage and electrocution, appeared due to the Borealis' lack of craftsmanship. However, Rene's commands were quite appropriate. With the Aurora Knight, whose average combat strength was incredibly high, providing cover and support, Donlan's battle results were quite impressive. Although the Sea Tribe lost some equipment, they didn't suffer many casualties. Although the Sea Tribe's reinforcements arrived, they were still unable to stop the funeral fleet's slow advance. Both sides entered a meat grinder-like battle of attrition. However, the Sea Tribe was able to block everything, and the Sea Tribe, which lacked fighting spirit and self-sacrifice, were naturally forced to retreat. Although the humans had also suffered significant losses in this battle, they had still achieved their initial strategic goal, reaching the docks where the underwater base was located. Upon reaching the docks, the Bardi Empire's fleet began to move around and enter a defensive position. The divers and the Sea Tribe prepared to start working underwater. However, an unexpected accident completely reversed the entire battle situation. This also made Camdrin travel thousands of kilometers to find Roland. After all, The things that had been revealed in this battle were of tremendous significance to an ancient elemental god like Camdron. Those dark elves have taken action. They've reversed the entire battle situation. Chapter 368. For any religion, heresy was more disgusting than the enemy. In the eyes of the traditionalists, their interpretations of doctrines and inventions of new things would make the religion lose its purity and orthodoxy and cause the believers to fall into discord. This was just like how the scariest incurable disease was cancer. However, the mutation of normal cells would spread far and wide. Once the mutation reached a certain degree, it would be impossible for a person to survive. And even if the person could be saved, the part that was cut off would greatly damage their vitality. And in this world where true gods existed, heretics and churches would make their own interpretations and interpretations of the true God's teachings. This would even cause changes in divine concepts and beliefs. Some changes would be permitted by the true gods, and some would even be the true God's own explorations and interpretations of divine concepts. However, this would also cause major and minor internal divisions within churches. Some would directly cross the true God's bottom line, angering the true gods and directly sending down divine punishment. Back in Sulphur Mountain City, a certain villainous disciple had conducted an experiment. He successfully brainwashed a demon into believing that he was a holy knight who believed in holy light, so the demon cultivated according to the standard holy knight procedures. In the end, the demon actually succeeded in summoning holy light. Although the very next instant, the holy light burned the god of holy light from the inside out and turned it into ashes, this phenomenon alone was more than enough to make even the most devout believer toss the god of holy light's teachings into the trash. Holy light is a gift from the god of holy light. Even his mortal enemy, demons, are given holy light. The god of holy light must be either an idiot or blind. Perhaps the other gods are the same. Gods wouldn't make mistakes. That was because making mistakes would show that they were foundationally no different from mortals. Gods were venerated, far superior to mortals. Mortals would only be able to understand gods from a few words of divine prophecy. That was because as long as mortals got closer and saw the gods clearly, they would naturally lose their respect for them. In that case, so-called pure faith would no longer exist. Most people in this world were unable to simply believe in a certain concept or belief like Roland. Their faith would always revolve around a certain god. Even though they were mortals who would definitely make mistakes, they hoped that their god wouldn't make mistakes and would always be correct. Only a god who knew everything would be worth entrusting everything to. On the one hand, you entrust everything to an existence that you can't even see clearly, while on the other hand, you're clearly a mortal who pretends to be holy. Just which is more laughable. This was Roland's mockery at the time, but it did make some sense. As for the information about the true gods, only a small number of powerhouses were in possession of it. When it came to the level of ordinary people, they would always know what the priest said. True gods are wise and great. They watch over the mortal world from high above and protect the mortals. The shameful incident of Soros in the Northlands only proved that there was no foundational difference between order and chaos. It was precisely this opposition that caused the Holy War to never end, which shook the foundational faith of the church members. If even true gods could be easily fooled, and they might not necessarily be smarter than that idiotly Gooden next door was known to the world, the foundational faith of mortals would also be shaken. It was foreseeable that if this information was thrown into the light of day, it would lead to destructive consequences. In the worst-case scenario, meteor showers, divine kingdoms falling, might be seen every few days. The reason why Roland hadn't thrown this information into the light of day yet was because he wasn't sure how great of an impact it would have after a crisis of faith occurred. If more than 50% of the human population lost their faith in order, a large number of gods would fall like dumplings being dropped into a pot, and the holy war wouldn't even need to be fought. But when a certain female elven holy knight under his command fell into a crisis of faith, Roland gave her the relevant information after much consideration. He hoped that she would be able to walk out of her over-reliance on the gods and create her own path. In addition, he also gave her some of Roland's personal understanding of law and the mysteries of the true gods. There was a famous saying that went like this: I only told one person, but one person told 10, and 10 people told 100, and it became a secret known to the entire country. Cough. It should be if you tell this secret to anyone, that secret will no longer be a secret. In this world, knowledge represented power. However, this didn't only apply to mages. But for a holy knight who used her faith and faith as her weapons, knowing more might not be a good thing. After Diana learned too much knowledge, she suffered a serious crisis of faith. She began to doubt her own life and future path. Diana's soul imprint shattered with a crack, and she directly fell from the legend rank. But the most important thing was that a certain someone casually told her, actually, I'm the most pious of them all. At the very least, I've never expected the gods to do anything for me. I don't even believe in the true gods themselves. I only believe in the concept of law, and I'm trying to use law to improve our world. Every night, this short sentence kept repeating in her mind, pounding on her past life like a bell. And with this knowledge and her younger sister's help, Diana reflected on her past life and came to a conclusion. Finally, she made up her mind. My disappointment in the Dark Elf Society, where even blood-related families would kill each other, made me abandon Rose and choose the path of holy light. I hoped that the holy light would be able to save me and my tribe, allowing us to walk under the sunlight. When I discovered that the path of holy light was only cleansing and would only bring about the destruction of my tribe, I saw that law allowed all the species in Sulphur Mountain City to live in harmony. That was when I gave up on my pursuit of holy light. I longed for law, the new power of order, to bring us under the sunlight. When my faith wavered, I once again studied the teachings of the Moonlight Goddess in order to find peace in my faith, as well as to return to the surface. Although I managed to bring myself under the sunlight this time, my heart was even more lost. Diana's silver holy light sword kept flashing with the constantly changing power of order. Her soul imprint shattered, but it also allowed her to break free from her previous restrictions. Her pure and innocent soul allowed her to resonate with the power of order. Perhaps, from a certain standpoint, this subordinate, who always watched from the sidelines, was the true disciple who had inherited Roland's understanding of the mysteries of the world. Being able to become a future epic-ranked hero and the leader of the Dark Elves was already proof of his extraordinary talent. And after I removed the veil from the real world for him, his achievements in the game's history far surpassed what he had achieved in the game. My lord is correct. Every time I believe in a god, it's because I want to fulfill my desires. It has long since become unrelated to being devout. Giving one's own expectations and goals to others is no different from throwing one's responsibilities to others. It's a type of escape. In her confusion, Diana mysteriously recalled what that man had said in the past. It's better to rely on yourself than on others. The gods can't even finish dealing with their own troubles. Rather than worshiping the gods and Buddhas, it's better to worship yourself. There are indeed many problems with the current world, and it's incredibly difficult to change even a single one of them. But there are some things that you won't have any hope of changing if you don't try. If you try, there's at least a chance of success. That was what that person said, and that was what he did. The underground world was the most chaotic place in the entire HE world. Yet, he established the paradise-like Sulphur Mountain City there. In this barbaric society where the strong preyed on the weak, he used the rules of the law to allow all species to enter a state of equality. The Dark Elves had always been viewed as an inherently evil species. Even though they had already become holy knights, they were still doubted. Yet, that person unhesitatingly accepted this group of Dark Elves who had nowhere else to go and gave them the heavy responsibility of protecting the city and its citizens. This was the first time that the Dark Elves had ever felt trust. This was a mystical place with an even more mystical master. He developed engineering technology that was viewed as a plaything, a mystical religious view that allowed many true gods to spread their teachings, and a new law that was based on equality for all living beings. His actions were always arrogant and domineering, even going against tradition. Perhaps this would seem insane to ordinary people, or perhaps many of his actions were incomprehensible. But in Diana's eyes, there was one thing that was quite obvious. He was trying to make this world a better place. He was trying to change it. He wasn't willing to accept the current situation. If you feel that this world isn't good enough, why don't you try to change it? What's the point of relying on the gods? They're nothing more than a group of clay bodhisattvas who can't even protect themselves. They're nothing more than pitiful worms tied to their divine thrones. The gods were supreme, and mortals were nothing more than ants in the eyes of the true gods. In that person's eyes, the true gods weren't any more noble than mortals. As time passed, he used actions to replace words. Rose, who had been suppressing the dark elves for tens of thousands of years, had finally fallen. Even the supreme god of holy light had been exposed on that day as a hypocrite. If it wasn't for the fact that Diana had long since been prepared, or perhaps it should be said that she had long since been suspicious of the god of holy light, it was likely that she would have been one of the holy knights who had lost their holy light's favor. I was abandoned by the holy light? No, I was the one who abandoned the holy light. Her soul imprint's golden glow was no longer present. Her past beliefs had been shattered. Her soul imprint, which had been shining brightly the day before, was now in tatters. At this moment, Diana recalled that on that airship, that person had revealed the truth about the apocalypse to her, as well as his almost impossible desire to save the world. The world is so difficult. Enduring and praying is meaningless. Is it foolish to do something that you know is impossible? Is it noble? Is it possible? No. Diana's memories had returned to the past 100 years when she had been searching for the apocalypse. She had once despaired and cursed, hoping that this world where all life was bitter would come to an end. But now that she thought about it, she realized that she had been far too selfish. Ending everything sounded great, but wouldn't that be far too cruel to the newborns who had just arrived in this world and hadn't yet experienced any happiness? Wouldn't it mean that the living creatures who were still struggling bitterly had to suffer? Wouldn't that be too cruel to the person who had sacrificed everything in exchange for a chance to change the apocalypse? Since she had made up her mind, the next instant her old soul imprint shattered into pieces. However, a silver light shone from within as a new soul path was formed. This new soul imprint was in the form of a fist holding a sword. We just want to continue living so that the mortals can live with more dignity and safety. Is this also wrong? A silver light flashed. After Diana had fallen from legend rank, the moment she entered legend rank again, she actually directly entered saint rank. Now that she understood her own path, all of her past accumulations transformed into actual power. Her understanding of the gods and divine power, holy light, moon god's power, the power of law, and the dark elves' natural resistance to magic were all mixed together. But the most important part was her own beliefs. This caused the turbid divine power within her to undergo a mysterious change. When all the colors of her divine power became turbid, all that was left behind was pitch black like the night. We want to continue living. We want to make the world a better place, even if the undefeatable gods are standing in our way. Awaken my soul imprint, the fool who opposes the gods. Diana was far more intelligent than anyone knew. From the things that Roland had revealed to her, she faintly sensed that Roland had always treated the true gods as his imaginary enemies. And when she learned the truth about the eternal holy war, she even pointed her finger at the two god factions that were high up in the sky and were constantly causing new waves of despair. Who didn't know that it was foolish to make the gods their enemy? Who didn't know that it was impossible to save the world? But since mortals also had the right to live, there were some things that had to be done. Since smart people weren't willing to do foolish things, then let us fools do it. The fool? That's really suitable for me. Diana inexplicably recalled the man who always called her a big, foolish girl. She laughed self-mockingly, but this only strengthened her resolve, as long as she could achieve her goal. So what if the world didn't understand her and laughed at her as a fool? At the very least, The person who also chose the path of a fool and a fanatic would definitely understand her choice. This path might be difficult, but it wasn't as if there weren't others who shared the same path. And that was indeed the truth. Not long after, the knight who also chose this thorny path also donned black armor and wore the medal of Blade of Resistance. But how many people knew the determination of the founder of this path, the big, foolish girl, and the true name of the anti-holy knight, the homonym of the anti-holy knight, the anti-god knight? They were the knight of mortals. They opposed the interference of the existences high up in the world. They believed that mortals' fates should be decided by mortals themselves. They believed that the gods and demons should stay in their own territories. They dared to wave their swords at anyone who crossed their boundaries. And at that moment, in the Ottoman Empire's aquatic battlefield, when the first anti-holy knight in history stabbed her holy sword into the water, perhaps even the true gods would be astonished. I hope that this world belongs to mortals. After this simple statement, the sound of rain and the flames of war continued as if nothing had happened. However, what silently spread out was Diana's soul world, the world of mortals. The soul world kept expanding, but it seemed as if nothing had happened at all. The next instant, the rain clouds in the sky suddenly vanished along with the entire aquatic battlefield. In this world of mortals, the special powers of demons, angels, demon kings, and even gods would all disappear. And the anti-holy knight's signature abilities were all sorts of anti-magic and anti-divine powers. They were the protectors of the mortal plane, the mortal enemy of existences from other planes. If the will of the mortal plane truly existed, perhaps this was a miracle created by Diana in order to save herself. After all, only a mythical knight who had experienced numerous trials would have the fool's will. Yet, only the dark elves who had the natural talent of anti-magic were able to use this natural ability. Perhaps it was the saying that heroes are born in troubled times. It was fate that allowed Diana to fuse everything she had under countless coincidences to create this unprecedented path. And on the battlefield right now, after the divine power forbidden spell was removed, there was no longer any suspense. The humans already had the advantage of timing and manpower. Now that they had the geographical advantage, the Sea Tribe's battle line was destined to collapse. Kajisi, who had been shrouded in dark clouds for 1.5 years, finally saw the first ray of sunlight. Chapter 369. Anti-Saint Knight, High-Tier Class. Advancement Requirements. Silver Pinnacle Knight / Swordsman Class. Heavy Armor Mastery. Military Weapon Mastery. Strength greater than 15. Stamina greater than 15. Willpower greater than 16. System Notification. The main attribute of this class is willpower. Only warriors with the strongest willpower can walk on this thorny path. Class Specialty. Mortal's Will. As the user's training level increases, the user will gain resistance to magic and divine power. This attribute can be enhanced by will and can be applied to armor and weapons. However, the user will lose the right to use all divine power and magic in exchange for this ability. Note: during class advancement, the knight's supernatural abilities will be converted into spirit power and willpower. Demon / Holy / Imbue the mortal's willpower on the blade and attack the target, expelling the magic and divine power of the target's weapon and equipment. This effect can be accumulated and will permanently reduce the target's power level after a certain amount. Note: this effect can only be dispelled by the restoration spell of a high-tier priest whose power level far surpasses that of a holy knight, or be dispelled by an anti-saint knight. Holy Sword Banishment. Choose a target from another world. Imbue the willpower that has been tempered to the extreme into a formless holy sword. Deal a large amount of non-elemental damage to the target and have a chance to banish the target back to their own realm. This supernatural ability can only be used on the target from another world. There is no limit to the number of uses per day before the user's spirit is exhausted. Unyielding Body. The sharpened willpower and mortal will increase the basic attributes of the body. Initial strength +2, constitution +2, starting from 16, Every 2 points increase in willpower, strength, and constitution will increase by 1 point. Every increase in rank, strength, and constitution will increase by a lot. Halo ability, Anti-Saint Barrier. Summon a barrier made of willpower to expel the magic and divine power effects. The effect of the barrier will be determined by the difference in power level between the user and the target. Duration, medium. Curse, a lone knight in the dark. The anti-saint knight is hated by the gods and is not understood by the mortals they wish to protect. Their glorious holy sword will turn into a dark demonic sword. Their silver armor will be covered by shadows. They are lone travelers in the dark. System notification. In addition to a -4 charm penalty, this curse also causes the believers of the gods to instinctively hate the anti-holy knight. System notification. The creation of this job class is closely related to you. You have personally changed the fate of the epic hero Diana, and the extent of the change is greater than the previous calculation. You have been awarded 1,000 fate points. P.S. This class has not been perfected yet. There is still the possibility of further strengthening. It was obvious that this class was a weaker version of the nemesis of God, Diana. This was a very normal thing in this plane. As mentioned before, many of the high-level jobs that could only be taken up by the gold rank were originally opened up by those who had reached the legendary rank. When this job was born, the system immediately gave me the relevant information and told me that I could ask Diana about the relevant information and spend some points to exchange for this job. Exceeding 3 attributes is 15 points. I also had to be skilled in using heavy armor and a military-grade weapon. The requirement for this job class were already legend rank, so it would definitely be a powerful job class. Although it would be difficult to advance to the next rank, I seem to have met all the requirements. That was why I should advance to the next rank. It would be nice to have a part-time job to get some talents. System. Do you think I would say that? Do I look like such an idiot to you? Indeed, the requirements for this job class to advance to the next rank were quite harsh. After advancing to the next rank, I would basically become a natural-born assassin, a mage assassin, and the mortal enemy of the gods and demons. But if I advanced to the next rank, I would definitely regret it. You will lose the ability to use all divine power and magic. Doesn't that mean that apart from the anti-holy knight's abilities, I can only use my racial talents? The ice, death, law, and holy light skills that I worked so hard to cultivate will all be destroyed. It could be said that if I advance to the next job class, I would go from a player with full skills to a high-level infantryman. I would have to rely on basic attacks to kill monsters, and I would have to rely on my feet to chase down enemies. If I couldn't run away, I would have to crouch down and cover my head. Should I celebrate that there was finally a job class with shorter legs than the Holy Knight? It was quite obvious that this job class was quite special. It didn't have any extravagant ultimate abilities like other high-level job classes, and it wouldn't even be able to use its original holy light or magic spells after changing job classes. However, it was still an incredibly powerful special job class. There would always be a loss for every gain, and there would always be a gain for every loss. Perhaps the anti-holy knight didn't have any extravagant supernatural abilities, but he could make his enemies lose their supernatural abilities as well. Meanwhile, the anti-holy knight would completely convert his own power into the most practical basic stats. It was easy to imagine that a high-level anti-holy knight would be a tank with ridiculously high physical and magical defense. Turning a powerful mage into a mortal, and then asking the mage who lost his supernatural abilities and magical equipment to fight a monstrous anti-holy knight whose willpower has strengthened him to the point of having a monstrous body? This is so shameless, so despicable, so perfect for my tastes. I could already predict that mage assassins who were even more shameless than dark elf assassins would soon appear. This time, the anti-holy knight would be the type that would kill you fair and square. But while the advantages of this job class were obvious, the weaknesses of this job class were even more obvious. Their short attack range and attack speed were ridiculously small. Against the most common job class in the mortal plane, pure warriors, this job class actually had no advantage at all. And when low-level mages had low resistances and insufficient special abilities, This job class would be quite difficult to deal with. But once this job class took shape, it would definitely be incredibly powerful. No matter what kind of transformation you have, I'll just take your attacks and kill you fair and square. That's just like that silly girl's personality. Still, it's quite obvious that this job class is suitable for fighting in groups. Perhaps it would be better to create a knight squad. It was also precisely because of Diana's outstanding performance that countless existences focused their attention on that battle. More people paid attention to her than to the outcome of the battle itself. However, this also caused a new job class that appeared to only be mentioned slightly in the intelligence reports. Desecration Priest? What's that? If the Holy Knight and Holy Temple Knight were the sharp swords that protected the church, then priests were the representatives of the true God's will and the spreaders of their teachings. Perhaps priests didn't have the ability to fight in battle, but since priests and divine arts were their lifelong goals, they had always been the leaders of the church. Desecration Priest and Diana's path of becoming an anti-holy knight were also the path that a certain person had taken. That's right. She was Victoria Siphon, the matriarch of all the dark elves in the game's history, the highest priestess of Rose, and the lover that Dasos had been conflicted over for his entire life. Cough. Let's not mention the last one for now. Even in the game's history that had already changed, Victoria had still managed to reach the position of the highest priestess closest to Rose. If it wasn't for the changes that happened later on, it would have been quite possible for Victoria to become the representative of Rose's will once again. Such an existence had reached the highest priestess in both lives, so it was likely that she had reached the apex of the priestess job class as well. In fact, her talent far surpassed Diana's, and she was one of the strongest priests in the world. But with the fact that she still hadn't been able to deal with her curse, Victoria was indeed quite unlucky. Actually, if you looked at how Victoria ended up marrying another man in the game's history, could she still be considered lucky? Cough. According to my personal experience, those who had bad luck or had bad relationships would be able to bring out their talents to the extreme in their work and accomplish great things. After all, if one's relationship or family became completely worthless, they would only be able to find comfort in their work. Yep, I was talking about Victoria, and I definitely wasn't thinking about myself at all. After Rose's downfall, the Dark Elf Society lost its god, and the Dark Elf Society fell into chaos. All rules and morals were abandoned, and in this chaotic period of time, a hero was naturally created, allowing history to return to its original point, Dark Elf Queen Victoria. With the support of Sulphur Mountain City's factions, Victoria, as the Siphon family's matriarch, not only gained control of her own underground city, she also furiously swallowed up other Dark Elf underground cities. Dark Elves were a world where the strong preyed on the weak. With the support of several underground autarchs at the time, how could the already scattered Dark Elves possibly resist the powerful Siphon family? Not to mention that several underground autarchs' armies were already stationed in each underground city. The current Victoria was no longer the pitiful, cute little gift from back then. She was now the most powerful person among the Dark Elves, and she controlled at least 40% of all Dark Elf factions. If she wanted to, she could simply call herself the Dark Elf Queen. And if someone else with an unclear mind took over the position, they might have already done so, and then I could guarantee that she would dejectedly step down from her position within a week. Lorcie's fall back in the day had caused a calamity for the entire Dark Elves. The highest-ranking Dark Elves in the city were all Lorcie's priests. As a result, more than 99% of the upper-class Dark Elves either died or went insane. The social conflicts that had already been suppressed to the extreme erupted in a single breath, and more than 90% of the underground cities went berserk. The crisis of faith that followed was a chaotic battle between the true gods over the territory of faith. The various true gods sent out their most elite priests with the most exquisite gifts to spread their faith, but the victor wasn't any kind and gentle outsider. Instead, it was Wumians who led his army into the underground cities. What? Stop you from spreading your faith? You don't have any evidence? Fine then, you have witnesses and material evidence. So what? Send someone down to the underground to beat me up. Considering that the true gods fought divine wars and national wars for the sake of faith, Shuidi's words on Wumian's behalf didn't cause too much controversy. If it weren't for the fact that he was far too shameless, Wumians could even call himself the guardian god of the Dark Elves. This didn't go against any of the gods' church's rules. Since Rose and Shuidi had both died in the Northland's battle against Wumians, then it was only natural that Wumians would come to reap the spoils of war from the gods' wars. Instead, it was the true gods who were fighting over Wumian's spoils of war that had gone overboard, as if they were bullying the newcomers. But now that the newcomers were so unyielding and had the support of Boss Ale, the true gods naturally stopped. Wumian's churches and courts were now spread throughout every underground city. The number of graduates from Lanxiang Law School had long since exceeded the demand. The prison cells in every city had been expanded by at least 10 times, but they were still filled to the brim. Many Archduke Knight had even reached the position of deputy mayor. At this point, some things were actually quite clear. Although Victoria had become the queen of the Dark Elves on the surface, she was actually a puppet of Sulphur Mountain City's forces. Although this sounded unpleasant to the ears, both Victoria and I were well aware of this fact. Yep, the truth was out. I didn't trust Victoria. She was different from Diana. She had a pure dark elf personality. She was skilled at disguising, betraying, and acting. In fact, she was even skilled at acting silly and cute. Her intelligence and political skills were both quite high, and she even had military abilities and talent. Back in the day, she was one of the underground autarchs who did the best in the game's history. She was able to marry a man in order to obtain even greater political value. Not only that, she didn't fall apart in the end. It wouldn't be wrong to call her a formidable character. Of course, I hoped that I would be able to trust her. At the very least, I had great trust in this silly girl. However, trusting someone required time, and I needed to clearly see her personality. Most importantly, I needed to clearly see her goals in life. Only then would I be able to predict what she would do in the future. However, it was a pity that after knowing her for almost 2 years, I was still unable to see through her. I had no idea what she wanted. It seemed that her life was all about instinctively climbing up and then kicking away those who stood in her way. This was a typical dark elf way of thinking, which made me even more worried. It wasn't easy for the Dark Elves to finally have a chance to break free from the twisted structure of society. How could I let it turn back to normal? I need to have a proper discussion with her. However, there were some things that, no matter how well planned, the end result would be completely incomprehensible, especially when it involved myself and those unreliable fellows. I had met with her several times as a private spy, but the moment I closed the door to her private room, I saw her hiding in a corner and trembling, as if I was an evil boss who was going to have a private room with her subordinates. I repeatedly explained that my sexual orientation was normal, but she wouldn't listen. Only later did I find out that it was actually those Dark Elf Town security members who spread rumors about me and showed her the pornographic novels and rumors about Sulphur Mountain City. As a result, I unknowingly became the main character of those pornographic novels and pornographic novels. My character's image was defined as being somewhere between a gay and a sex fiend. Naturally, the more I tried to explain, the worse things would get. In the end, she would always run away, and the next day, the rumors would start flying everywhere. What? Why didn't I chase after her? Haha, wouldn't that be nothing more than rumors flying everywhere? There would be eyewitnesses of an evil boss secretly raping a young girl. Her older sister would definitely come after me to the death. And then I asked her to talk to me in a public place. You actually want to do public play? That's such a heavy taste. At that time, her face paled, and she even shouted out loud. Her scream was incredibly loud, and there were even echoes in the auditorium. Everyone looked at me in disbelief. This time, it was my turn to run away. The next day, I felt like my head was about to explode in order to explain the rumors. After that, there was no more after that. I wanted to avoid this trouble, so why would I actively provoke her? Plus, I was so busy that I naturally forgot about it. Victoria's incredibly beautiful appearance caused me to be swayed to the point of crashing into a wall again. That was just a rumor, not true. I definitely didn't feel that she was the most beautiful girl I knew, nor did I ever be swayed to crash into a clock tower. That clock tower would definitely collapse on its own, now that I thought about it. It was probably because both of our luck stats were quite pitiful. And whenever we were together, my passive god of misfortune ability would activate, causing her to be unlucky. And whenever she was unlucky, I would be unlucky as well. Every time, the method would be different, but the end result was that both of us would be unlucky. Getting back to the main topic, due to various factors, she ended up in her current position. In a way, she became a person on the sidelines and a puppet leader. Obviously, she wasn't willing to accept such a situation. So, she directly resigned and said that she was only capable of being the ruler of a city. She hoped that she would be able to focus all her energy on personal cultivation. Although I didn't understand how she could still cultivate since she was already an ex-priestess, I had no reason to refuse her. It would seem that she had truly obtained some benefits from her cultivation, and the source of these benefits was most likely related to me. A desecration priest who steals divine power? That's insane. Tell Victoria and Diana to immediately come to the Bardi capital to meet me.